The crystal chandelier above table 7 cast dancing shadows across the white linen tablecloth as Sophie Martinez wiped down the bar for the
Given the
third time that
projections,
evening.
I believe this
Her
merger
hands trembled
presents a unique
slightly,
opportunity
not
for
from
both
exhaustion,
I
but
agree.
from the
Let's move
electric
forward with the
awareness that he
proposal.
was here again. Nathaniel Sterling, the owner of Sterling Restaurant Group, and this impossibly elegant restaurant, sat alone at his usual corner table. His dark suit probably cost more than her entire year's salary back in Texas. Sophie had been working at Celestine for exactly 2 weeks, and in that time she had learned 3 things about Nathaniel Sterling. First, he came to his own restaurant every Thursday night at exactly 8 o'clock. Second, he always sat alone, observing everything with those intense gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, every mistake, every imperfection. Third, he never smiled. She adjusted her black apron and tried to focus on polishing wine glasses, but her gaze kept drifting back to him. At 36, Nathaniel Sterling was one of the youngest restaurant magnates in Manhattan. According to the whispered conversations she had overheard among the other staff, he had inherited his father's restaurant empire at 28 and had expanded it significantly within 8 years. Now he owned 30 of the most exclusive dining establishments across the country. "Stop staring," hissed Rosa, the veteran server who had taken Sophie under her wing. "He notices everything." Sophie jerked her attention back to the glass in her hand, her cheeks burning. "I wasn't staring, I was just observing." "Everyone stares at first," Rosa interrupted, her voice softening with something that might have been sympathy. "But trust me, Chica, you don't want his attention. He fired 3 people last month for minor mistakes. He's brilliant, but he's ice cold." As if to prove Rosa's point, Nathaniel lifted one finger without looking up from his phone, and immediately a server appeared at his side. Sophie watched the interaction from her position behind the bar, noting how the server's shoulders tensed, how Nathaniel's expression remained completely neutral as he gave his order. There was no please, no thank you, just crisp instructions delivered in a voice that expected absolute obedience. The evening continued in its usual rhythm. Sophie served drinks, cleared tables, and tried to memorize the complex wine list that seemed to change weekly. She was good at her job. She knew that. Back in her hometown of San Marcos, Texas, she had worked her way through community college by waitressing at a local diner. But Celestine was different. Everything here operated at a level of precision that bordered on intimidating. Sophie's mind drifted back 3 years to a different kind of restaurant. Her father's favorite place had been Mario's Garage and Grill, a dive bar attached to an auto shop where Roberto Martinez had worked as a mechanic for 20 years. The food had been simple but honest. Burgers and beer, laughter and conversation. Her father had known every regular by name, had asked about their families, had cared about their lives beyond the transactions. Integrity over everything, Michita, her father had told her countless times while teaching her to change oil in the garage bay. Your word and your character, those are the only things no one can take from you. Roberto Martinez had died 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack at 55, leaving Sophie and her mother Elena with medical debt and a grief that still felt raw some days. Before he died, Sophie had promised him she would reach higher than the small-town limitations of San Marcos. She would make something of herself. She would build a life that honored his memory and his sacrifices. That promise had brought her to New York City 2 weeks ago, with $47 in her wallet, a community college degree in hospitality management, and a determination that bordered on desperation. She shared a tiny studio apartment in Queens with Jade Chen, a graduate student she had found through a roommate matching service. The rent was $1,400 a month for her portion, and her savings were disappearing faster than she had anticipated. At 9:30, Nathaniel's dinner arrived. Sophie recognized the dish from the menu she had been forced to memorize: pan-seared Chilean sea bass with truffle risotto, $485 for a single portion. She watched from her position at the bar as the server placed it before him with careful ceremony. Nathaniel nodded once, dismissing the server, and began to eat with the same methodical precision he seemed to apply to everything. Then something strange happened. Nathaniel's head dipped forward slightly, his hand loosening on his fork. At first, Sophie thought he was simply looking down at his phone, but then his eyes closed. His breathing deepened, became rhythmic. Within moments, it was clear that Nathaniel Sterling had fallen asleep at his table. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath. Sophie saw Rosa freeze in mid-step, saw the other servers exchange panicked glances. This had never happened before. Nathaniel Sterling did not fall asleep in public. He barely seemed human enough to require sleep at all. "Should someone wake him?" whispered one of the busboys near Sophie's station. "Are you crazy?" Rosa shot back in a harsh whisper. "If he wanted to sleep, who are we to disturb him?" But Sophie's attention had shifted to something else. On the table, partially hidden by Nathaniel's relaxed arm, was a money clip. Even from this distance across the restaurant floor, she could see the thick stack of $100 bills. There had to be thousands of dollars there, just sitting exposed on the table in a public restaurant. Her stomach twisted with unease. This felt wrong. Nathaniel Sterling was many things according to restaurant gossip. Controlling, brilliant, demanding. But careless was not one of them. Men who built empires worth hundreds of millions did not fall asleep in their own restaurants with thousands in cash left vulnerable on the table. Sophie glanced around the dining room. Most of the guests were absorbed in their own conversations, their own perfectly plated meals and expensive wines. But she noticed a couple at the adjacent table looking at the money clip with undisguised interest. The man leaned over to whisper something to his companion, and they both glanced at Nathaniel's sleeping form. Something in Sophie's chest tightened. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe rich people did this sort of thing all the time, testing the security of their own establishments. Or maybe Nathaniel Sterling was simply exhausted, genuinely asleep, and someone needed to protect him from his own vulnerability. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Do what's right, mijita, even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you." Before she could talk herself out of it, Sophie set down her wine glass and moved toward table 7. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each step. She was the newest employee here, the one who was supposed to keep her head down and not draw attention to herself. But she couldn't just stand by and watch. As she approached, she took in more details. Nathaniel's face, usually so stern and controlled, looked younger in sleep. The harsh lines around his mouth had softened, and there was something almost vulnerable about the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. His breathing was deep and even, and for just a moment, Sophie felt a strange pang of protectiveness toward this man who seemed to carry the weight of an empire on his shoulders. She reached the table and carefully, moving as quietly as possible, she reached for the money clip. Her fingers had just closed around the thick stack of bills when a voice, cold and sharp as a blade, cut through the air. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Sophie's head snapped up. Nathaniel's eyes were open, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Those gray eyes weren't sleepy or confused. They were completely alert, completely aware, and absolutely furious. Sophie started, her voice coming out as barely a whisper. She was still holding the money clip, she realized with horror. She was standing over her boss's table, holding what had to be at least $5,000 in cash. And he had just caught her red-handed. "I asked you a question." Nathaniel sat up fully, his posture transforming from relaxed to predatory in an instant. "What are you doing with my money?" Every eye in the restaurant was now turned toward them. Sophie felt heat crawl up her neck, felt the weight of all those stares. This was it. She was going to be fired, possibly arrested. Her grand New York adventure was going to end in spectacular failure. "I was trying to keep it safe," she managed, her voice stronger now, despite her racing heart. She placed the money clip carefully back on the table, her hand steady even though she felt like she might shatter. "You fell asleep and it was just sitting here. I saw other people looking at it, and I thought I would hold it behind the bar until you woke up." "And you thought you would steal it?" Nathaniel's voice was deadly quiet. "No." The word came out sharper than Sophie intended. "I was going to hold it for safekeeping. I wasn't stealing it. I would never." People say a lot of things. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "You're new here. What's your name?" "Sophie Martinez." "Sophie Martinez," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "And how long have you worked at Celestine?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks, he echoed. "And in those 2 weeks, has anyone explained to you that servers do not touch customers' personal belongings, ever, for any reason?" Sophie's jaw tightened. Yes, she had been in the wrong technically, but she had been trying to help, trying to do the right thing. And now he was treating her like a criminal. The unfairness of it sparked something defiant in her chest. Has anyone explained it to you that falling asleep in a public restaurant with thousands of dollars on your table is incredibly reckless? She shot back before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Rosa made a small strangled sound from somewhere behind the bar. Sophie saw one of the other servers actually take a step backward, as if expecting an explosion. But Nathaniel Sterling didn't explode. Instead, something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been surprise, or possibly amusement. It was gone so quickly, Sophie couldn't be sure she had seen it at all. "You're fired," he said flatly. The words hit like a physical blow. Sophie had known it was coming, but hearing it still made her stomach drop. "Mr. Sterling," she started. "You're fired," he repeated, standing up. Now he was tall, she realized, at least 6'2", and the way he looked down at her made her feel impossibly small. "Collect your things and leave. Human Resources will send your final paycheck." "That's not fair." Sophie's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I was trying to help you." "I don't need your help, Miss Martinez. I need employees who follow protocol and respect boundaries." "You didn't respect either." She was going down in flames anyway. Might as well speak her truth. "You created a situation that looked like someone in trouble. Basic human decency says you help people who might need it." Nathaniel picked up the money clip and slid it into his pocket with deliberate slowness. "Now please leave before I call security." Emma wanted to argue more, wanted to make him understand, but the cold finality in his expression stopped her. She had seen that look before, back in Texas, in the eyes of people who had already made up their minds and saw no reason to reconsider. Nathaniel Sterling was not going to listen to her. Continuing to fight would only make this humiliation worse. "Fine," she said quietly. She untied her apron with shaking fingers and set it on the nearest chair. "I hope you're never in a position where someone's trying to help you and you're too stubborn to see it." She walked toward the staff room with her head held high, refusing to let him see how close she was to tears. Behind her, she heard the restaurant slowly return to its normal rhythm, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Rosa caught her arm as she passed the bar. "Sophie, I'm so sorry." "It's fine," Sophie lied, gently extracting herself from Rosa's grip. "I'll be fine." But as she collected her purse and thin jacket from her locker, Sophie wasn't sure that was true. She had come to New York with such hope, such determination to build a better life. She had saved for 2 years to afford the move, had worked double shifts to build up enough of a cushion to take the risk. And now, 2 weeks in, she was unemployed because she had tried to do the right thing. Sophie pushed through the staff exit into the cold November night, wrapping her jacket tighter around herself. The subway station was 3 blocks away, and she had exactly $47 in her wallet to last until she could find another job. The reality of her situation began to sink in, heavy and suffocating. She had made it half a block when she heard footsteps behind her. Sophie's whole body tensed, her hand moving automatically to the pepper spray in her purse. New York had seemed glamorous from Texas, but she knew better than to be careless on city streets at night. But when she turned, it wasn't a mugger she found. It was Nathaniel Sterling. He had put on an expensive-looking black coat and was walking toward her with that same purposeful stride she'd observed in the restaurant. Sophie's heart began to race again, this time with confusion rather than fear. "Mr. Sterling," she said uncertainly. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable in the streetlight. "You forgot your tip money from earlier in the evening. It's restaurant policy that you receive it even if your employment is terminated." He held out an envelope. Sophie stared at it, then at him, searching his face for some clue about what was really happening. This didn't make sense. He had just fired her. Why would he follow her outside to deliver tip money that probably amounted to less than $50? "I don't understand," she said slowly. "It's not complicated, Miss Martinez. This is your money. Take it." Sophie reached out and took the envelope, her fingers brushing against his for just a second. Even through her confusion, she registered how warm his hand was, how steady. She opened the envelope and her breath caught. There had to be at least $500 inside. "This isn't right," she said immediately, trying to hand it back. "My tips tonight were maybe $40. Consider it severance pay then." Nathaniel interrupted. His voice was still cool, still distant, but something in his eyes had changed. And perhaps an acknowledgement that you were trying to help, even if you went about it the wrong way. Sophie looked at the money, then back at him. Why did you really fire me? The question seemed to surprise him. I told you why. No, you gave me a reason. That's not the same thing. Sophie's grip tightened on the envelope. You set that whole thing up, didn't you? You weren't really asleep? You left that money there deliberately. You were testing me, testing all of us. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but Sophie saw the minute tightening around his eyes that told her she was right. Why? She pressed. Why test your own employees like that? For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked away, his gaze moving to the distant lights of Manhattan's skyline visible between the buildings. Because trust has to be earned, he said finally. Because I've learned that people show their true nature when they think no one is watching. Because in my experience, Miss Martinez, most people fail these tests. But I didn't fail, Sophie said quietly. I tried to protect your property. That's not failure. No, Nathaniel agreed, his eyes returning to her face. You didn't fail, but you also didn't follow protocol. In my restaurants, protocol matters more than integrity. Protocol is integrity. It's the structure that keeps everything running smoothly. Without it, there's chaos. Sophie shook her head slowly. That's the coldest thing I've ever heard. People aren't machines, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't in the protocol handbook. Something flickered across Nathaniel's face again, that same brief crack in his icy composure. Perhaps. But structure is what I can control. People's hearts, their intentions, those are variables I can't account for. There was something in the way he said it that made Sophie's anger falter. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and the cold demeanor to something else. Loneliness, maybe. Or the kind of weariness that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. That sounds like a very lonely way to live, she said softly. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. I should get back to the restaurant. I hope you find employment that suits you better, Miss Martinez. He turned to leave, and Sophie knew she should just let him go. She should take the money, find another job, and forget about Nathaniel Sterling and his ice-cold restaurant. But something made her call out. Mr. Sterling. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Thank you for the money. You didn't have to do that. For the first time since she had met him, Nathaniel Sterling's expression softened just slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something close. Yes, I did, he said. Whether you believe it or not, I appreciate what you tried to do tonight. I just wish you had done it differently. Then he was gone, walking back toward Celestine with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders squared against the night. Sophie stood there for a long moment, clutching the envelope and trying to understand what had just happened. Then she shook her head and started walking toward the subway. Whatever strange encounter that had been, it was over now. She would probably never see Nathaniel Sterling again. She had no way of knowing how wrong that assumption was. Sophie made it back to her tiny studio apartment in Queens just after 11. The lights were off, which meant Jade was either studying at the library or working her night shift at the hospital, where she was doing her nursing clinical rotation. Sophie was grateful for the solitude. She didn't think she could face explaining what had happened tonight. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and counted the money from the envelope. $500 exactly. Combined with the $47 she already had, that gave her $547 total. Her rent was due in 23 days. She had $1,400 to come up with, plus food, subway fare, and basic necessities. The math was simple and brutal. She needed a job immediately. Sophie changed into the oversized Texas Longhorns t-shirt she slept in, a relic from her community college days, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The apartment was so small she could hear the neighbor's television through the thin walls, could hear sirens in the distance, could hear the city that never slept humming around her. She thought about her father, about the promise she had made at his bedside 3 years ago. I'll make something of myself, Papa. I'll reach higher. I won't let your sacrifices be for nothing. Was getting fired from a waitressing job after 2 weeks reaching higher? Or was it just proof that she didn't belong in this world of crystal chandeliers and $500 fish dinners? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her mother, Elena, in Texas. How is my New York girl? Miss you, mijita. Call me this weekend. Sophie typed back quickly. "Doing great, Mama. Miss you too. We'll call Sunday." She couldn't tell her mother she'd been fired. Not yet. Not when Elena had worked so hard to help make this dream possible, taking on extra hours at the elementary school where she worked as a secretary to help Sophie save money for the move. Sophie finally fell asleep around 1 in the morning, her dreams filled with gray eyes and cold voices, and the weight of $500 that felt more like a question than an answer. Across town, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Nathaniel Sterling stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows and stared out at the glittering city below. He held a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, his mind replaying the events of the evening over and over. The test had been simple. He conducted them periodically with new staff, leaving money or valuables visible to see who would steal, who would ignore, and who would protect. Most ignored it, following the protocol to never touch customer belongings. A few had stolen it over the years, and those people were dealt with swiftly. But Sophie Martinez had done something no one else had ever done. She had tried to protect him, not the money. Him. "Your word and your character." His father William's voice echoed in his memory. "Those are the only things that truly matter, Nathaniel. Everything else is just window dressing." William Sterling had died 2 years ago from a massive stroke, sudden and devastating. One moment he had been laughing at dinner, telling stories about the early days of his first restaurant. The next moment he was on the floor, and nothing Nathaniel did could bring him back. In the aftermath, Nathaniel had discovered the ugly truth. His father's trusted business partners had been embezzling for years. His father's generous nature had been exploited, his trust weaponized against him. The company had nearly collapsed under the weight of betrayal and debt. Nathaniel had spent 2 years cleaning up the mess, cutting ties with anyone who might pose a risk, implementing systems and protocols designed to eliminate human error and human weakness. He had tripled the company's value in that time, but he had done it by removing every trace of his father's warmth and replacing it with cold efficiency. "Control what you can control," he told himself daily. "Trust is a liability. Emotion is weakness." But tonight, a young woman from Texas with fire in her eyes had looked at him and said, "People aren't machines." And something about the way she said it had reached through all his carefully constructed walls and touched something he thought he'd buried with his father. Nathaniel finally took a sip of his whiskey and turned away from the window. Sophie Martinez would find another job. She was clearly competent, clearly principled. She would be fine. And he would go back to his controlled, structured, lonely existence. Except he couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at him and said that sounds like a very lonely way to live. Because it was lonely. And he had chosen it deliberately. And until tonight, he had convinced himself that was exactly what he wanted. Nathaniel set down his glass and walked to his home office. He pulled up Sophie Martinez's employment file on his computer, the one his human resources department had assembled when she was hired. Associate's degree in hospitality management from Austin Community College, 4 years of restaurant experience, excellent references from all her previous employers describing her as punctual, reliable, and exceptional with customers. Born in San Marcos, Texas. Father Roberto Martinez, deceased 3 years prior. Mother Elena Martinez, still living in Texas. He shouldn't be looking at this. She was no longer his employee. This was inappropriate. But he kept reading anyway, learning about this woman who had tried to protect him and gotten fired for her trouble. This woman who had challenged him and walked away with her dignity intact. This woman who had seen through his test and called him out on it. Nathaniel closed the file and shut down his computer. Tomorrow he would forget about Sophie Martinez. Tomorrow he would go back to his regularly scheduled life of control and protocol, and careful distance from anything that might hurt him. Tomorrow. But tonight, just for tonight, he let himself wonder what might have happened if he had handled things differently. The next morning, Friday, found Sophie in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment, her laptop open and her resume pulled up on the screen. She had revised it 5 times already, trying to figure out how to explain her brief stint at Celestine without making it sound terrible. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Sophie hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Sophie Martinez?" "Yes. This is Amanda Kim from Tableau Restaurant Group. We received your application this morning." Sophie's heart leaped. Tableau was one of the mid-tier restaurant groups in Manhattan. Not as elite as Sterling, but respectable. She had applied online at 6 in the morning, barely expecting a response. We'd like to bring you in for an interview. Would Monday afternoon work for you? Yes, absolutely. What time? 2 o'clock. Ask for me at the host stand. Thank you so much. I'll be there. Sophie ended the call and allowed herself a small smile. Maybe things were going to be okay after all. One door closes, another opens, as her father used to say. She spent the weekend applying to 18 more restaurants, 5 hotels, and 2 catering companies. She heard back from 6, all saying they would keep her resume on file. By Sunday evening, her small victory with Tableau was the only bright spot in an otherwise bleak job search. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Sophie dressed in her interview outfit, a simple black dress and blazer that Jade had lent her, and took the subway into Manhattan. She arrived at Tableau 30 minutes early, spent 20 minutes walking around the block to calm her nerves, and presented herself at the host stand at exactly 1:55. The interview went well. Amanda Kim was professional and kind, asking thoughtful questions about Sophie's experience and philosophy on hospitality. Sophie answered honestly, letting her passion for the work show through. "Why did you leave Celestine after only 2 weeks?" Amanda asked, her pen poised over Sophie's resume. Sophie had prepared for this question. There was a difference in management philosophy. "I believe in balancing protocol with genuine care for guests. It wasn't the right fit." Amanda nodded. "I understand. Celestine has a reputation for being rather rigid. We prefer a more personal approach here at Tableau." The interview ended with a handshake and a promise to hear back within a few days. Sophie left feeling cautiously optimistic. At least she had options. At least she wasn't completely starting over. She was halfway to the subway when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something made her pick up. "Hello, Miss Martinez?" The voice was crisp, professional, distinctly female. "Yes? This is Jennifer Walsh from Sterling Industries Human Resources. Do you have a moment?" Sophie's heart began to race. Sterling Industries, Nathaniel's company. What could they possibly want? "Yes, I have a moment to guest," she said slowly. "Excellent. Mr. Sterling has requested a meeting with you this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Would you be available?" Sophie nearly dropped her phone. A meeting about what? Mr. Sterling didn't specify the details. Jennifer said smoothly. "He simply asked that I arrange the meeting. Can I confirm your attendance?" A dozen questions crowded Sophie's mind. Why would Nathaniel want to meet with her? Was he going to accuse her of something? Demand the severance money back? Or maybe, a small hopeful voice whispered, maybe he was going to offer her job back. "Miss Martinez," Jennifer prompted. "Yes," Sophie heard herself say. "I'll be there." "Wonderful. The address is 432 Park Avenue, 57th floor. Security will be expecting you." The line went dead. Sophie stood on the Manhattan sidewalk, her phone still pressed to her ear, trying to process what had just happened. After 3 days of silence, Nathaniel Sterling wanted to see her. The question was why? Sophie had 3 hours to figure out what she was going to say to the man who had fired her. 3 hours to prepare for whatever this meeting might bring. 3 hours to decide if this was an opportunity or a trap. She checked her reflection in a store window. The borrowed interview outfit would have to do. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her minimal makeup was still in place. She looked professional, composed. Nothing like the terrified girl who had clutched $47 and wondered how she would survive in this city. Sophie took a deep breath and started walking toward the subway. Whatever Nathaniel Sterling wanted, she would face it with her head high and her integrity intact, just like her father had taught her. Because in the end, that was all she really had. Her word and her character. The only things no one could take from her. Unless, of course, she gave them away. And Sophie Martinez had no intention of doing that. Not for anyone. Not even for a second chance she desperately needed. The city moved around her, millions of people pursuing their own dreams and disasters, and Sophie moved with them. Unknown and unremarkable. Just another young woman trying to make it in New York. But in a glass tower overlooking the city, Nathaniel Sterling was watching the clock and thinking about a woman who had tried to save him from imaginary thieves, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, he had made a terrible mistake 3 days ago. The answer waited at 4 o'clock, for both of them. The Sterling Industries building was impossible to miss, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds, rising 40 stories above Park Avenue. Sophie stood outside at 3:45, staring up at it and trying to calm her racing heart. She had changed back into the borrowed professional outfit, the simple black dress and blazer that Jade had lent her. She looked presentable, at least. Whether she felt presentable was another matter entirely. The lobby was all marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Sophie approached the security desk with as much confidence as she could muster. Sophie Martinez. I have a 4 o'clock appointment with Mr. Sterling. The security guard checked his computer, then nodded and asked for identification. Sophie handed over her driver's license, received a visitor badge in return, and was directed to a specific elevator bank. The elevator itself was faster than any she had ever experienced, rocketing upwards so quickly her ears popped. When the doors finally opened on the 57th floor, she stepped out into a reception area that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. A woman in a sharp gray suit looked up from behind a curved desk. Miss Martinez? Yes. Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Follow me, please. Sophie followed, her heels clicking on polished floors, past glass-walled conference rooms and offices with views that stretched across the entire city. Employees moved purposefully through the space, everyone dressed impeccably, everyone looking like they belonged here. Sophie felt distinctly out of place, a girl from Texas playing dress-up in a world of Manhattan power brokers. They stopped at a door at the end of the corridor. The woman knocked once, then opened it without waiting for a response. Miss Martinez, Mr. Sterling. Sophie stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind her. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. Nathaniel stood with his back to her, looking out at the skyline. He was in shirt sleeves, his jacket discarded on a nearby chair, and for a moment, Sophie was struck by how different he looked here in his own domain, less controlled somehow, more human. Thank you for coming, he said without turning around. Did I have a choice? Sophie asked, then immediately regretted the defensive tone. Nathaniel turned then, and his gray eyes found hers with that same unsettling intensity she remembered from Celestine. There's always a choice, Miss Martinez. You chose to come here. You could have ignored the call. True. Sophie lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated by the vast office and the man who owned it. So why did you ask me here? I want to offer you a job. Whatever Sophie had been expecting, it wasn't that. She stared at him, trying to determine if this was some kind of elaborate joke or test. You fired me 3 days ago. I'm aware of that. You called me a protocol violation and had me escorted out of your restaurant. I remember, Nathaniel said, and there was a hint of something that might have been amusement in his voice. Do you want to keep listing my mistakes, or would you like to hear about the job? Sophie crossed her arms. I'm listening. Nathaniel moved to his desk, picking up a file folder. I've been thinking about what you said, about protocol versus integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's not in the handbook. And I've realized that perhaps my approach has been too rigid, too focused on control at the expense of individual judgment. He opened the folder, glanced at something inside, then looked back at her. You have an interesting resume, Miss Martinez. Associate's degree in hospitality management, 4 years of restaurant experience, excellent references from all your previous employers. You're punctual, reliable, and according to everyone I spoke with, you have exceptional instincts for customer service. Sophie felt heat rise to her cheeks. You investigated me. I investigate everyone who works for me, or might work for me. Nathaniel set the folder down. Here's my proposition. I'm opening a new restaurant in 3 months. It's my passion project. A smaller, more intimate space focused on farm-to-table cuisine and exceptional service. I need someone to help develop the service philosophy, someone who understands both the technical requirements and the human element. You want me to work on service philosophy? Sophie couldn't keep the irony out of her voice. I thought I was terrible at following protocols. You're terrible at following unnecessary ones, Nathaniel corrected. But I think you'd be excellent at creating necessary ones. Protocols that serve the customer experience rather than just management's need for control. It was a tempting offer, the kind of opportunity that could actually advance her career, not just pay the rent. But something about this didn't add up. Why me? She asked. You must have dozens of qualified candidates with more experience. I do, Nathaniel agreed. But they all think like me. They see restaurants the way I've been seeing them, as systems to be perfected and controlled. You see them differently. You see the people first, the system second. That's what I need. Sophie studied him, trying to read past the careful composure to whatever was really driving this offer. What happened to the man who fired me for not following protocol? Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a crack in the armor. He met someone who reminded him why he got into this business in the first place, before it became about empires and bottom lines. He moved around the desk, closer to her. Look, I know I came across as cold the other night. I know I was unfair. But I build walls for a reason, Miss Martinez. In my experience, the moment you let people too close, they find ways to disappoint you. That's a pretty cynical worldview. It's a realistic one. Nathaniel's voice was quiet now, almost tired. My father built this company from nothing. He trusted the wrong people, made deals with the wrong partners, and it nearly destroyed everything. When I took over, I promised myself I would never make his mistakes. Control became my religion. Trust became my enemy. Sophie felt her anger softening despite herself. And now? Now I'm wondering if maybe I've been so focused on protecting what I have that I've forgotten how to grow. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically vulnerable that Sophie's breath caught. Your instinct that night was to protect me, to protect my property, even at potential cost to yourself. That's rare. That's valuable. And I was too caught up in my own rules to see it. Sophie wanted to stay angry with him, wanted to throw his job offer back in his face and walk out with her pride intact. But looking at him now, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes, she found she couldn't do it. What would the job actually involve? She asked. Relief flickered across Nathaniel's face, so quick she almost missed it. You would work directly with me over the next 3 months. We would visit the new location, meet with the design team, develop the service model. You would have input on hiring, training, the overall guest experience. Once we open, you would be the assistant general manager. That's a huge responsibility for someone who got fired after 2 weeks. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, which is why the salary would reflect that responsibility. $70,000 annually, plus benefits and performance bonuses. Sophie's breath caught. $70,000. That was more than double what she had been making back in Texas. More than she had dared hope for in her first real New York job. That's generous, she managed. It's fair, Nathaniel corrected. And it's what the position deserves. What you deserve, if you're willing to take the risk. Sophie looked at him, really looked at him, trying to decide. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had come to New York to find. But it also meant working closely with a man who was brilliant and compelling and absolutely terrifying in his intensity. I'll need one condition, she heard herself say. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, which is honesty. If we're going to work together, I need you to be straight with me. No more tests, no more games, just direct communication. For a long moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. That's fair, I can do that. Then I accept. The smile that crossed Nathaniel's face was small but genuine. The first real smile Sophie had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, and considerably less intimidating. Excellent, can you start Monday? Monday works. Good. Nathaniel extended his hand. Welcome to Sterling Industries, Miss Martinez. Sophie took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. If we're going to work together, you should call me Sophie. Sophie, Nathaniel repeated, and something about the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. I'm Nathaniel, though most people call me Nate, and I think this is going to be an interesting collaboration. As Sophie left his office 20 minutes later, contract in hand and head spinning with details about start dates and paperwork and the Brooklyn location where the new restaurant was taking shape, she couldn't help but think he was right. Working with Nathaniel Sterling was definitely going to be interesting. The question was whether interesting would be enough to bridge the gap between his need for control and her instinct for compassion. Only time would tell. Sophie's first Monday started at 6 in the morning with a text message that made her phone buzz on the nightstand, pulling her from dreams of glass towers and gray eyes. Coffee at Morrison's Cafe. We need to talk vision. 7 a.m. sharp. Sophie blinked at her phone, then at the clock. 6:03. She had 57 minutes to shower, dress, and make it to Morrison's, wherever that was. She typed back quickly. Address? The response came immediately with a location pin. Sophie pulled up the map and felt her stomach sink. Morrison's was in Tribeca, at least 45 minutes away by subway. She made it at 6:58, slightly breathless, and very aware that she was starting her first official day with Nathaniel Sterling. The cafe was a small, elegant space with exposed brick and the rich smell of fresh coffee. Nathaniel sat at a corner table, laptop open, 3 notebooks spread out, and 2 cups of coffee already waiting. He looked up when she approached, and she was struck again by those gray eyes that seemed to see everything. "You're early. Good." He gestured to the chair across from him and slid one of the coffee cups toward her. "I ordered you a cappuccino. That's what you drink, right?" Sophie slid into the seat surprised. "How did you know that?" "I pay attention," Nathaniel said simply. And there was something in the way he said it that made Sophie's pulse quicken. For the next 2 hours they talked. Nathaniel asked questions, challenged her assumptions, pushed her to articulate things she had never quite put into words. What made a meal memorable? What was the difference between good service and exceptional service? When did attention to detail cross the line into being intrusive? Sophie found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, talking about her father's favorite place back in San Marcos, Mario's Garage and Grill, where the owner knew everyone's name and remembered their usual orders, how the food had been simple but made with care, and how that had mattered more than any Michelin star. "That's what's missing from most high-end restaurants," Nathaniel said thoughtfully, making notes in one of his notebooks. "We're so focused on perfection that we forget about connection. We make people feel impressed but not welcomed." "Exactly," Sophie agreed, surprised by his insight. "Your restaurants are beautiful and the food is incredible, but they feel distant, like museums you're visiting rather than places you belong." She expected him to be offended, but instead Nathaniel nodded slowly. "That's what I want to change with this new place. I want people to feel like they're coming home, just to a home with exceptional food and wine." "Then you need to start with the staff," Sophie said. "They're the ones who create that feeling. You can't train people to be warm and welcoming if you're treating them like interchangeable parts." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "You're right, which is why I'm going to need you to handle the hiring. I want you to find people who get it, who understand that this is about more than just taking orders and serving food." "That's a lot of trust to put in someone you fired 2 weeks ago." "Yes," Nathaniel agreed. "It is, but I'm starting to learn that trust is a risk worth taking, at least with the right people." The rest of that first week followed a similar pattern. Early morning meetings at coffee shops, afternoons spent visiting the Brooklyn location, evenings reviewing budgets and menu proposals. The restaurant was a converted warehouse with gorgeous exposed brick walls and soaring ceilings. It had good bones, as Nathaniel put it, but it needed vision to become something special. Sophie and Nathaniel disagreed on almost everything at first. She wanted warmer lighting that would make guests feel relaxed and comfortable. He insisted on stark modern fixtures that would showcase the space's industrial architecture. She pushed for cushioned seating that invited people to linger over meals. He wanted sleek minimalism that looked sophisticated in photographs. But gradually, they found a rhythm, a way of challenging each other that led to solutions neither had considered alone. "What if we use warm-toned LED bulbs in the modern fixtures?" Nathaniel suggested during one particularly heated debate over lighting. "We keep the clean aesthetic but soften the atmosphere." "And add cushions to the minimalist chairs?" Sophie countered. "Modern design, comfortable experience." Nathaniel's rare smile appeared, transforming his face. "See? We're learning to compromise." But it wasn't just the work that was intense. There was something else building between them. A tension Sophie couldn't quite name. She would catch Nathaniel watching her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded, and something in her chest would tighten, or their hands would brush while reviewing documents, and she would feel a jolt of electricity that seemed to linger in the air between them. She told herself it was just the intensity of working so closely together, that the attraction she felt was natural but meaningless, a byproduct of proximity and shared purpose. Nathaniel Sterling was her boss, her employer, and he was still emotionally closed off despite his recent willingness to compromise on design choices. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was Thursday of the 3rd week, and they were at the Brooklyn location taking measurements for final table layouts. The space was starting to come together. The exposed brick had been cleaned and sealed. The industrial lighting fixtures were installed with the warm LED bulbs they had compromised on. The bar area was taking shape near the open kitchen, where Chef Tobias Gran, an old friend of Nathaniel's, would work his magic. Sophie was crouched down measuring the distance between table positions when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Austin Regional Hospital. I need to take this, she said quickly, her voice tight with sudden fear. She stepped into the corridor outside the restaurant space, her hand shaking slightly as she accepted the call. Hello? Is this Sophie Martinez? The nurse's voice was professionally gentle, which somehow made it worse. Yes, this is Sophie. I'm calling about your mother, Elena Martinez. She's been admitted to the emergency room. She collapsed at work this afternoon. We need you to come in as soon as possible. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sophie's mother was in Texas, over 1,500 miles away. She was in New York, in a half-finished restaurant, measuring table spacing while her mother was in a hospital bed. What happened? Is she okay? The doctor will need to speak with you about the details. How soon can you get here? Sophie's mind raced, calculating flight times and costs. Her savings were still precarious despite the new salary. She hadn't received her first paycheck yet. I can catch a flight tonight. I'll be there as soon as possible. She ended the call and stood there in the corridor, trying to process what she had just heard, trying to think through the panic that was rising in her chest. Her mother was sick. Her mother was in the hospital. And Sophie was on the wrong side of the country. Sophie. She looked up to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway. Concern etched across his features. She realized her face must have given something away. She had always been terrible at hiding her emotions. What's wrong? It's my mother, Sophie heard herself say, her voice shaking now despite her best efforts to control it. She's in the hospital in Austin. I have to go. Nathaniel moved closer, and Sophie realized her hands were trembling. Of course you need to go. Your mother is what matters. The work can wait. I'll need to use some personal days. I know I just started, but I need to be there. Sophie! Nathaniel's voice was firm now, cutting through her panic. Listen to me. Take whatever time you need. Your job will be here when you get back. Now, when's the next flight to Austin? Sophie pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, pulling up flight schedules through blurry vision she hadn't realized was tears. There's one at 9 tonight. If I leave now, I can make it. Okay. Nathaniel was already pulling out his own phone. Go home and pack a bag. I'll have a car pick you up at 7:30. Nathaniel, I can take the subway, Sophie protested weakly. Sophie. He looked at her, and the softness in his eyes made her throat tight. Please let me help. She nodded, not trusting her voice anymore. Sophie made it back to her queen's apartment on autopilot, throwing clothes into a bag without really seeing what she was grabbing. Jade was at class, so Sophie left her a note explaining the emergency and trying not to think about worst-case scenarios. Her mother was only 58. She was healthy. This was probably nothing serious, just exhaustion or stress or something manageable. But the nurse's tone had been gentle in that careful way that medical professionals used when things were serious. At 7:30 exactly, there was a knock at her door. Sophie grabbed her bag, expecting a driver in a black car. Instead, she opened the door to find Nathaniel himself standing there in jeans and a dark sweater, looking nothing like the billionaire businessman, and everything like just a man who had come to help. What are you doing here? Sophie asked. Surprised? I'm taking you to the airport. He reached for her bag. Come on, traffic's going to be terrible. You don't have to do this. I know. Nathaniel met her eyes, but I want to. They drove in silence for the first few minutes, the city lights streaming past the windows of Nathaniel's Range Rover. Sophie tried to hold herself together, tried not to think about all the things that could be wrong with her mother. But her mind kept spinning through possibilities, and she felt tears building behind her eyes. She raised me alone, Sophie heard herself say, the words spilling out before she could stop them. My dad died when I was 23. Heart attack. Completely unexpected. And Mom, she just kept going, kept working, kept being strong. She always told me I needed to follow my dreams, to not let his death make me small. That's why I came to New York, because she believed I could do more than just survive. She wanted me to thrive. She sounds like an amazing woman, Nathaniel said quietly. She is. A tear escaped, rolling down Sophie's cheek. She has to be okay. I can't lose her too. Nathaniel reached over and took her hand. The gesture was simple, uncomplicated, but it anchored Sophie in the moment. His hand was warm and solid, and she held on like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "I lost my father too," Nathaniel said after a moment. 2 years ago. Massive stroke. He was laughing at dinner one moment, and the next he was gone. His grip tightened on her hand. He built everything from nothing, and I spent so many years being angry at him for not being more careful with his trust, for letting people take advantage of him. I thought I knew better than him, thought my way was smarter, safer. And now, Sophie asked softly, now I wish I had spent less time being angry and more time just being his son. Nathaniel's voice was rough with emotion. He wasn't perfect, but he loved what he did. He loved connecting with people, building something that mattered. And I took that legacy and turned it into a machine. I thought I was honoring him, but really I was just protecting myself from feeling what he felt. The vulnerability of caring. Sophie squeezed his hand. You're changing that now. The new restaurant, Stellara. It's more like what he would have wanted, isn't it? Yeah, Nathaniel agreed. Yeah, it is. And I have you to thank for that, Sophie. You reminded me what matters. They arrived at the airport, and Nathaniel insisted on walking her to the security checkpoint. At the entrance where passengers had to go through alone, he pulled an envelope from his jacket and pressed it into her hands. What's this? Sophie asked. Open it later. Nathaniel cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Your mother is going to be okay. She raised a daughter who's brave enough to chase her dreams in a new city and strong enough to stand up to difficult bosses. That takes an incredible woman. Sophie felt something crack open in her chest. Without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. For a second, Nathaniel tensed, as if the gesture had surprised him. But then his arms came around her, solid and strong, and Sophie felt safer than she had since that phone call. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. Anytime, he murmured into her hair. Call me when you know something. I will. On the plane, Sophie finally opened the envelope. Inside was $3,000 in cash and a note in Nathaniel's precise handwriting. For medical expenses or whatever you need, don't argue. This is what friends do. Friends. Sophie stared at the word, at the money, at the evidence that Nathaniel Sterling was so much more than the cold billionaire he pretended to be. And she realized with startling clarity that somewhere between the arguments about lighting fixtures and the late-night budget reviews, she had started to fall for him. The question was whether he felt the same way, or if she was just another employee he was being generous toward. Either way, Sophie knew that when she returned to New York, everything between them would be different. She just had to figure out if different meant better, or if it meant complicated beyond repair. The hospital room was sterile and too bright, with machines beeping softly, and the antiseptic smell that Sophie would forever associate with the worst moments of her life. Her mother lay in the bed looking smaller than Sophie remembered, her face pale against the white pillows. Elena's eyes opened when Sophie entered, and relief flooded her features. Mijita. Sophie crossed to the bed and took her mother's hand, fighting tears. Mama, what happened? The doctor says I've been working too hard, Elena said, and there was a weak smile on her face. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, low blood pressure. Nothing serious, just my body telling me to slow down. But Sophie had spoken to the doctor in the hallway. She knew the whole truth. Her mother had been working double shifts at the elementary school, skipping meals to save money, running herself into the ground. And Sophie knew why. To send money to New York. To support Sophie's dream. You've been working yourself sick for me, Sophie said, her voice breaking. Don't be dramatic, Mijita, Elena protested, but her eyes were soft. I just forgot to take care of myself. That's all. The next 2 days passed in a blur of hospital visits and difficult conversations. Sophie learned that her mother had been hiding how hard things were financially, that she had been taking on extra janitorial work after her secretary job ended each day, that she had been sending Sophie money she couldn't afford to spare. I'm coming back to Texas, Sophie said on Saturday morning, sitting beside her mother's hospital bed. I can get a job here, take care of you. You will do no such thing, Elena said firmly, with more strength than she had shown since Sophie arrived. You will go back to New York in that fancy job with that man who clearly cares about you. Sophie felt her cheeks warm. He's my boss, Mama. That's all. Elena's knowing look was the same one she had given Sophie throughout her childhood. The one that said she could see through any lie. Mijita, I raised you. I know that tone. Tell me about Nathaniel Sterling. And Sophie found herself doing just that. Telling her mother about the test, the firing the second chance, about working together and the way he made her feel challenged and seen and valued, about how he had driven her to the airport himself and given her money for medical expenses without hesitation. When she finished, Elena was smiling. Your father was a mechanic. I was a teacher's aide when we met. Different worlds, different backgrounds, but we fit. And that's all that mattered. But what if I'm reading too much into it? Sophie asked. What if I'm just an employee to him? Has he given you any reason to think you're just an employee? Sophie thought about the way Nathaniel had held her hand in the car. The way he had said this is what friends do. The way his eyes had looked when he brushed away her tears. No, she admitted. But I'm scared, Mama. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of mixing work and feelings. Scared that I don't belong in his world. Life is too short for maybes and what-ifs, baby girl, Elena said gently. Believe me, I know. Your father taught me that. If you feel something real, don't hide from it because you're afraid. Be brave enough to find out if it's mutual. Sophie stayed in Austin until Sunday evening, making sure her mother was truly stable and arranging for neighbors to check on her regularly. She also had a frank conversation with Elena about money, insisting that her mother stop working extra shifts and let Sophie help now that she had a real salary. On the flight back to New York, Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from Nathaniel. How's your mother? Sophie typed back, her heart beating faster just seeing his name on her screen. Much better. Heading back tonight. Thank you again for everything. His response came quickly. Glad to hear it. Take tomorrow off to rest. We'll catch up Tuesday. But Sophie didn't want to take Monday off. She wanted to see him, to figure out what was happening between them. So Monday morning at 7, she showed up at Morrison's Cafe with 2 cappuccinos and a determination to be brave, just like her mother had said. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop when she arrived, surprise flickering across his face. Sophie, I told you to take the day off. I know, she said, setting one of the cappuccinos in front of him and sliding into the chair across from him. But I wanted to see you. Something shifted in his expression, became softer. Is that okay? She added, suddenly uncertain. Yeah, Nathaniel said, and his voice was warm in a way she had never heard before. That's more than okay. They spent the morning talking about Stellara, about the timeline, about the hiring process that would start soon. But underneath the professional conversation was something else, something unspoken, but present in every glance, every accidental touch, every moment their eyes met and held. I've been thinking, Nathaniel said when they were walking to his car to drive to Brooklyn. About the restaurant, about the timeline. We've been pushing hard, and I think we both need a break. What if we took a few days? Went upstate. There's a farm-to-table place in the Hudson Valley I've been wanting to check out. See how they do things. A research trip, Sophie said slowly. We'd stay at a bed and breakfast nearby, Nathaniel continued. Visit some farms, eat at the restaurant, see what we can learn from places that are already doing what we want to do. He paused, and for the first time since she had met him, Nathaniel Sterling looked uncertain. Unless you'd rather not. I know it's a lot of time together outside the office. I'd like that, Sophie said quickly, her heart racing. When would we go? This weekend, Friday through Sunday. Okay, yes, let's do it. Nathaniel's smile was genuine and warm, and Sophie felt something settle in her chest. Whatever was happening between them, whatever this was becoming, she was ready to find out. Ready to be brave, just like her mother had taught her. Ready to see if the man who had started as a cold stranger might become something more. The answer waited in the Hudson Valley, in a weekend that would change everything between them. For better or worse, Sophie was ready to find out which. The Monday morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the first real bite of approaching winter. Sophie stood on the observation deck of a small park overlooking the Hudson River, watching early morning joggers pass and commuter ferries cut white trails through the dark water. She had received a text from Nathaniel at 6:30, asking her to meet him here before heading to the office. No explanation, just a location pin and a simple request that felt weighted with significance. She saw him approaching from the parking area, 2 coffee cups in hand, and her heart did that strange skip that had become familiar over the past weeks. He was in jeans and a dark jacket, casual in a way that made him look younger, more approachable, more like the man she had glimpsed in the car driving to the airport, less like the controlled CEO who ruled a restaurant empire. "Good morning," he said, handing her one of the coffees. "Cappuccino, as usual." "Thank you." Sophie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to do with the nervous energy coursing through her. "This is a beautiful spot. I come here sometimes when I need to think, when the office feels too confining." Nathaniel moved to stand beside her at the railing, both of them looking out at the river and the city beyond. "I wanted to talk to you before we went back to work, before we got caught up in schedules and meetings and all the things that make it easy to avoid difficult conversations." Sophie's pulse quickened. "What did you want to talk about?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, and she could see him gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with the same care he brought to everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I've been trying to maintain professional boundaries with you, telling myself it's just that we work well together, just mutual respect and shared vision. But I can't lie anymore. Not to you, not to myself." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gray eyes took her breath away. "I'm falling in love with you, Sophie." The words hung in the air between them, profound and terrifying and perfect. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes, felt her chest constrict with emotion so strong it was almost painful. "It started that first night," Nathaniel continued, his voice rough with emotion. "When you tried to protect me, when you challenged me and walked away with your dignity intact. Every day since, you've made me want to be better, more human, less afraid. You reminded me why my father loved this business, why connection matters more than control. Sophie, I know this is complicated. I know I'm your boss, and there are power dynamics to consider, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what I feel." She realized she was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at this man who had started as a cold stranger and become someone she couldn't imagine her life without. "I'm falling for you too," she said, her voice shaking. "I have been for weeks. I just didn't think someone like you would ever see someone like me that way." Nathaniel reached up and cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Someone like me? Sophie, you're the bravest, most genuine person I've ever met. You walked into my life when I needed you most, even though I didn't know it. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that caring isn't a liability. If anything, I'm the one who should be wondering how I got this lucky." "But I work for you," Sophie said. "This could get complicated, messy. Then we do it right. We're honest with human resources. We restructure the reporting so there's no direct conflict. We keep it professional at work." Nathaniel's hands were still on her face, warm and steady. "I won't risk your career, Sophie. I won't risk us. But I also can't pretend this isn't real." Sophie felt something break open in her chest, all the fear and doubt and hope flooding through her at once. "So, what do we do now?" "Now," Nathaniel said softly, his eyes searching hers, "I'd really like to kiss you, if that's okay." "That's more than okay," Sophie whispered. When his lips met hers, it was everything she had imagined, and nothing she could have prepared for. Tender and intense, careful and desperate. A kiss that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. Sophie's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as her own. The morning cold disappeared, the distant traffic sounds faded, and there was only this moment, this man, this feeling of rightness that settled deep in her bones. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to look back someday and wonder what if. My father told me once that the only real failure is never taking the chance." "Neither do I," Sophie said. "So we take the chance, together." "Together," Nathaniel agreed, and kissed her again. The meeting with Jennifer Walsh in Human Resources was professional and straightforward. Company policy allowed relationships between employees as long as they were disclosed and managed appropriately. The solution was simple. Sophie would report directly to Chef Tobias Grant for all Stellara operations. Nathaniel would maintain ownership oversight, but no direct supervisory role over Sophie's daily work. "This is unusual but not prohibited," Jennifer said, making notes in her file. "The key is maintaining professional boundaries in the workplace. What you do outside of work is your business, but inside these walls, your colleagues first." "We understand," Nathaniel said. "And Miss Martinez," Jennifer added, looking at Sophie directly. "If you ever feel pressured or uncomfortable in any way, my door is always open. These policies exist to protect you." "Thank you," Sophie said, appreciating the concern even though she knew it wasn't necessary. "I appreciate that." Their first official date was that Friday night. Nathaniel picked her up at 7, and Sophie felt like a teenager getting ready for prom, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple navy dress that Jade approved with an enthusiastic thumbs up. "He's here," Jade called from the window. "And girl, that man brought you flowers." Sophie opened the door to find Nathaniel holding a bouquet of white roses, looking nervous in a way that made her heart melt. "You look beautiful," he said. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sophie replied, taking the flowers. They went to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, deliberately choosing a place that wasn't part of Sterling Restaurant Group. Nathaniel had made it clear he wanted this to be about them, not about work. "No business talk tonight," he said as they settled into a corner booth. "Just us." And they talked, really talked, about Sophie's childhood in Texas, helping her father in the auto shop on weekends, learning to change oil and check tire pressure while he taught her about integrity and hard work, about Nathaniel's lonely childhood in Connecticut, boarding schools and country clubs, and the pressure to be perfect, about the movies they loved, the books they read, the dreams they had set aside, and the ones they still carried. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Sophie said at one point, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Me neither," Nathaniel admitted. "But it feels right, doesn't it?" "Yeah," Sophie smiled. "It really does." Over the next weeks, they carefully integrated their 2 worlds. Sophie brought Nathaniel to her tiny Queens apartment to properly meet Jade, who grilled him with protective intensity before finally declaring him acceptable. They flew to Austin for a weekend so Nathaniel could meet Elena, and Sophie watched her mother charm him over homemade tamales and stories about Roberto. "He's good for you, mijita," Elena said when Nathaniel stepped outside to take a business call. "I see it in your eyes. You're happy." "I am, Mama," Sophie admitted, really happy. "Your father would have liked him," Elena said softly. "He would have seen past the money and the fancy suits to the man underneath, the one who's still figuring out how to be vulnerable." Nathaniel introduced Sophie to his world, too. A dinner with Sterling Group executives where Sophie held her own despite feeling out of her depth, earning respect with her insights and authenticity. A charity gala where she wore a borrowed gown and felt like Cinderella, but Nathaniel never left her side, whispering commentary that made her laugh and forget to be nervous. "You were amazing tonight," he told her in the car afterward. "Half those executives have MBAs from Harvard. You have something better. You have heart." The work on Stellara continued with new energy, 6 weeks until opening, and the restaurant was taking beautiful shape. The exposed brick glowed under the warm lighting. The open kitchen gleamed with new equipment. The communal tables and intimate booths created spaces for both connection and privacy. It was becoming exactly what they had envisioned together. Sophie led the hiring process with Toby, interviewing dozens of candidates and selecting staff who shared their vision. People who saw hospitality as more than a job, who understood that serving others was an honor, not a burden. The training sessions were intense but joyful, building a team that felt more like a family. Nathaniel watched her lead, and Sophie could see the pride in his eyes. "This is your vision coming to life," he told her during a late-night walk through the nearly complete space. "This is what you were meant to do." "Our vision," Sophie corrected. "We built this together." And they had. Through compromise and collaboration, through arguments and resolutions, through learning to trust each other's instincts and challenge each other's assumptions. Stellara was becoming a physical manifestation of their partnership, proof that different perspectives could create something neither could have achieved alone. Their relationship developed alongside the restaurant, both requiring care and attention and a willingness to be vulnerable. Sunday morning walks through farmers markets, researching ingredients and suppliers. Late night dinners at hole-in-the-wall places Nathaniel had never noticed before, places Sophie found that reminded her of home. Quiet evenings at his penthouse or her tiny apartment, learning each other's rhythms and quirks and the small intimacies that build between two people falling in love. Nathaniel learned that Sophie sang off-key while cooking, that she cried at commercials featuring dogs, that she called her mother every Sunday without fail. Sophie learned that Nathaniel had a weakness for old detective novels, that he made terrible puns when he was tired, that he still missed his father with an ache that never quite faded. "I used to be angry at him," Nathaniel admitted one night, lying beside Sophie on her narrow bed, the city lights filtering through thin curtains, for trusting the wrong people, for letting himself be vulnerable. "I thought he was weak." "And now?" Sophie asked softly, her head on his chest. "Now I think maybe he was the strongest person I knew. Because he kept caring even when it cost him. He kept connecting with people even when they disappointed him. He never let fear make him cold." "You're becoming more like him," Sophie said. "In the best ways." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head. "Because of you." But happiness, Sophie was learning, was often fragile. And success drew attention, not all of it welcome. 8 weeks into the Stellara project, with opening night just 4 weeks away, Nathaniel was called to a board meeting. Sophie knew something was wrong when he returned to the Brooklyn location that afternoon, his jaw tight and his eyes troubled. "What happened?" she asked, setting down the menu layouts she had been reviewing. Nathaniel pulled her into the small office they had set up in the back of the restaurant space, closing the door behind them. "The board has concerns. About Stellara. About us." Sophie felt her stomach drop. "What kind of concerns?" "Vivian Crawford, our Senior VP of Operations. She raised questions about the project's profitability projections. Stellara's expected return on investment is lower than our other properties. More importantly, she brought up our relationship." Sophie's hands clenched into fists. "What did she say?" "That there's a perception issue. That your salary and position might be seen as preferential treatment given our relationship. That even though we disclosed everything properly and restructured reporting, it still looks like favoritism to outside stakeholders." "But I earned this position," Sophie said, her voice tight with anger and hurt. "I've worked my ass off." "I know. I told them that." Nathaniel ran his hand through his hair in that gesture Sophie had come to recognize as frustration. "But perception matters in business, Sophie. The board is worried about liability, about lawsuits, about the company's reputation." "So what did they decide?" "They're bringing in an independent consultant, Patricia Cross. She'll evaluate Stellara's operations, review our hiring and training, assess the business model. We have 4 weeks to prove that this restaurant works and that you earned your position on merit, not because of our relationship." Sophie felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. "So I'm on trial. Everything I've done is being questioned." "We're both on trial," Nathaniel corrected gently. "They're questioning my judgment as much as your competence. But you're the CEO. You own the company. I'm just the girl from Texas who happened to catch your attention." "Don't do that. Don't diminish yourself." Nathaniel moved closer, but Sophie took a step back. "You're not just anything. You're brilliant at this work, and we're going to prove it." The consultant arrived the following Monday, 4 weeks before opening night. Patricia Cross was a severe woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of skepticism that put everyone on edge. She observed everything, questioned every decision, took notes constantly. Why this seating arrangement? Why hire this particular server? Justify this budget allocation? Sophie handled it professionally, explaining her reasoning with calm confidence, even as she felt scrutinized in a way that made her skin crawl. Every choice she had made was being examined, every decision questioned, and Nathaniel couldn't intervene without it looking like he was protecting her, proving Vivian's point about favoritism. The stress mounted as the days passed. 2 weeks until opening, and Patricia was still observing, still questioning, still taking those damn notes. Sophie found herself second-guessing decisions she had been confident about, wondering if her instincts were as good as she thought, or if Nathaniel's faith in her had been misplaced. Late one night, she broke down crying in Jade's arms. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I only have this job because he loves me?" Not because I'm actually qualified. Stop it, Jade said firmly. I've watched you work yourself half to death for this restaurant. I've seen you handle problems and lead that team. You're brilliant at this, Sophie. Don't let them make you doubt what you know in your heart. But what if people always wonder? What if I always wonder? The following afternoon, Rosa made a surprise visit to Stellara. Sophie hadn't seen her mentor since leaving Celestine, and the older woman's presence brought unexpected comfort. I heard through the restaurant gossip network that you were having a tough time, Rosa said, pulling Sophie aside. Wanted to come and see how you were holding up. Sophie tried to smile. I'm fine, just the normal pre-opening stress. Rosa gave her a look that said she wasn't buying it. Mija, I've been in this industry for 30 years. I've seen a lot of talented people come and go. And you? You have the gift, the way you connect with people, the way you lead. That's not something that can be taught. That comes from in here. She tapped Sophie's chest over her heart. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Not some consultant, not the board, not even that man you love. You know who you are. Thank you, Rosa, Sophie said, hugging her tightly. I needed to hear that. The relationship strain was inevitable under the pressure. Sophie felt herself pulling away, shutting Nathaniel out when he tried to help or comfort. He felt frustrated and helpless, wanting to fix things, but knowing his intervention would only make matters worse. Small disagreements escalated into arguments. Stress bled into their personal time until there was no clear boundary between the professional crisis and their relationship. I don't need you to fix this, Nate, Sophie snapped one evening when he suggested ways to address Patricia's concerns. I need to handle it myself. I'm trying to help, Nathaniel shot back, his own frustration showing. By making me feel like I can't do this without you? That's not helping. They both said things they regretted, both lashed out from fear and exhaustion. The distance between them grew, and Sophie hated it but didn't know how to bridge the gap without compromising what she needed to prove. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon, 10 days before opening. Sophie was in the back office when she heard Nathaniel's voice coming from the main dining room, clearly on a conference call. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the open floor plan meant sounds carried. Vivian's voice came through the speakerphone, crisp and businesslike. Nathaniel, I need to be frank. The preliminary report from Patricia has raised concerns. Perhaps Miss Martinez would be better suited to a different role. Someone with more experience could finish the opening. Sophie felt the words like a physical blow. They were going to remove her. After everything she had done, everything she had proven, they wanted to replace her. She didn't wait to hear Nathaniel's response. She grabbed her coat and left through the back entrance, not trusting herself to face anyone without falling apart. That evening, Nathaniel came to her apartment. Sophie let him in, but couldn't meet his eyes. I need to resign from Stellara, she said without preamble. What? Absolutely not. Nathaniel looked shocked. Sophie, no. It's the only way to prove this wasn't about us. Let them bring in someone else to finish. After opening, if I've proven myself elsewhere in the company, maybe then people will see I earned it. You're not resigning. We're not giving up. Nathaniel reached for her, but Sophie stepped back. Don't you see? Every success I have here will be questioned. I'll always be the girlfriend who got lucky, not the professional who earned it. Who cares what they think? You know the truth. I know the truth. I care. Sophie's voice broke. I need to know I earned this myself, that I'm good enough on my own merit, not because the man I love believes in me. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. I think we need some space, Sophie said finally, the words tearing at her heart even as she spoke them. Just until after the consultant report. I need to do this on my own for the next 2 weeks. Prove to myself that I can. Nathaniel looked devastated. You're breaking up with me? No, I'm just saying I need to do this independently. To know that whatever success or failure comes, it's mine, not ours. Mine. Sophie, don't do this. We're stronger together. I have to. Please understand. Sophie felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I love you. But I need to love myself too. I need to respect myself. And right now, I don't know if I'm good enough. You are? You're more than good enough. Then let me prove it. Give me these 2 weeks, please. Nathaniel looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to fight for them. But something in Sophie's expression must have told him she needed this, that pushing would only drive her further away. Okay, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. 2 weeks. But Sophie, I love you. That doesn't change, no matter what. I love you too, she whispered. That's why I have to do this. After he left, Sophie collapsed on her bed and sobbed. Jade held her and didn't say anything, just offered the silent comfort of presence. Later that night, Sophie called her mother. "Mama, I think I made a terrible mistake," Sophie said through tears. "Coming here, getting involved with him, all of it." "Mia, you're scared. That's different from being wrong." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Tell me what happened." Sophie explained everything: the consultant, the doubts, the separation. When she finished, Elena was quiet for a moment. "Your father used to say something when things got hard," Elena said finally. "He'd say, 'You belong anywhere you choose to be. The question isn't whether you belong there, Sophie. It's whether you have the courage to stay.' But what if everyone's right? What if I don't deserve this? What if you do? What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do, and the only person who doesn't see that is you?" Sophie wiped her eyes. "I'm scared, Mama." "I know, baby girl. But being scared and being wrong aren't the same thing. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is believe in ourselves when everyone else is making us doubt." The next 2 weeks were the longest of Sophie's life. She threw herself into Stellara preparations with single-minded focus. Opening night was approaching rapidly, and there were 1,000 details to manage. Staff training intensified, final inspections were completed, supplies were ordered and delivered. The restaurant was ready. Sophie just had to prove she was too. She saw Nathaniel only in professional contexts. Brief meetings about logistics, quick emails about scheduling, nothing personal. It was torture. She missed him constantly, wanted to call him 100 times a day, but she held firm. This was something she needed to do. Patricia's observations continued, but Sophie stopped caring about the notes and questions. She knew her work was solid. She knew her team was ready. She knew Stellara was going to be something special. If Patricia couldn't see that, if the board couldn't see that, then Sophie would deal with that reality when it came. But she wouldn't doubt herself anymore. Rosa came by several more times, bringing encouragement and wisdom from 3 decades in the industry. "You're ready for this, mija. Trust yourself." Toby checked in daily, offering both professional support and personal friendship. "The boss is miserable without you, he's trying to respect your space, but he looks like hell." Sophie felt her heart clench. "Is he okay?" "He will be. When you are." Toby smiled gently. "You two belong together. Everyone can see it but you." "I just need to know I belong here first," Sophie said. "On my own terms." "Fair enough. But don't take too long figuring it out. Life's too short for maybes." The weekend before opening, Sophie allowed herself to miss Nathaniel fully, to acknowledge how much she wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to feel his arms around her. She picked up her phone 12 times, but always stopped short of dialing. On Sunday evening, her phone buzzed with a text. From Nathaniel. The first personal message in 2 weeks. "I'm respecting your space, but I need you to know something. Whatever that report says tomorrow, whatever the board decides, I believe in you. I've always believed in you. And when you're ready, I'll be here. I love you." Sophie stared at the message through blurry eyes, her finger hovering over the reply button. She typed and deleted 3 responses before finally settling on something simple. "Thank you, I love you too." Monday morning arrived gray and cold. The consultant's final report was due at 9. The board meeting to discuss it was at 10. Sophie dressed carefully in her most professional outfit and headed to Sterling Industries headquarters. Whatever came next, whatever verdict Patricia Cross delivered, Sophie was ready to face it, ready to find out if she had been right to doubt herself or wrong to doubt the man who believed in her, ready to discover whether standing alone had made her stronger or simply made her lonely. The answers waited in a conference room on the 57th floor, and Sophie walked toward them with her head high and her heart breaking, hoping that proving herself hadn't cost her everything that mattered. The conference room on the 57th floor was all glass and chrome, with views of Manhattan stretching endlessly in every direction. Sophie sat in a leather chair that cost more than her monthly rent, her hands folded carefully in her lap to keep them from shaking. Around the long table sat members of Sterling Industries' board of directors, Nathaniel at the head with his face professionally neutral, and Vivian Crawford with her sharp eyes and sharper suits. Patricia Cross stood at the front with the presentation remote in hand, her severe expression giving nothing away. Sophie had spent 2 weeks being observed and questioned by this woman. 2 weeks of second-guessing every decision, doubting every instinct. Now the verdict was here. "Thank you all for gathering," Patricia began, clicking to the first slide. "I've completed my comprehensive evaluation of the Stellara project, including operational planning, staff selection and training, budget management, and leadership effectiveness." Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel Nathaniel's eyes on her, but she didn't look at him. Couldn't look at him. Whatever came next, she needed to face it on her own terms. After 10 weeks of observation, Patricia continued, "I have concerns." Sophie's stomach dropped. There it was, the confirmation of every fear, every doubt. She braced herself for the words that would end everything she had worked for. Concerns that Sterling Restaurant Group hasn't done more projects like this. Wait, what? The room went completely silent. Even Vivian looked surprised, leaning forward slightly in her chair. Patricia clicked to the next slide, which showed detailed metrics and observations. Miss Martinez demonstrates exceptional leadership capabilities. Her hiring choices are excellent. Every staff member she selected shows not just technical competence, but genuine passion for hospitality. Her training methodology is innovative, focusing on emotional intelligence and authentic connection rather than rote protocol memorization. Another slide. Her guest experience design is industry-leading. The balance between intimacy and grandeur, between accessibility and sophistication, shows a deep understanding of what makes dining memorable, rather than merely impressive. Sophie realized she had stopped breathing. She forced herself to inhale slowly as Patricia continued. Her budget management has been responsible and creative. She found cost savings without compromising quality. She negotiated with vendors to establish relationships rather than simply transactions. And her operational planning accounts for variables that more experienced managers often overlook. Patricia turned to face Sophie directly, and for the first time, there was something that might have been approval in her sharp eyes. "Young woman, you have a gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. In my 20 years as a restaurant consultant, I've rarely seen someone with your instinctive understanding of what hospitality truly means." The board members began murmuring among themselves. Nathaniel's face showed carefully controlled relief, but Sophie could see the emotion in his eyes. Vivian looked like she had swallowed something bitter, but was too professional to spit it out. Patricia clicked to her final slide, a summary of recommendations. "My assessment is that Stellara should proceed as planned with Miss Martinez in her current role. Furthermore, I recommend that Sterling Industries consider expanding this model to other properties, with Miss Martinez providing consultation and training." The board chairman, an older gentleman named Harold Chen, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Miss Martinez, do you have anything to add?" Sophie stood on shaking legs, years of waitressing giving her the poise to stay composed, even when her heart was racing. "I just want to say that I'm grateful for this opportunity. I know there were questions about whether I earned this position, and I understand why those questions existed. I hope my work over these past weeks has demonstrated that I take this responsibility seriously, and that I'm committed to honoring the trust that's been placed in me." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Stellara isn't just a restaurant to me. It's a chance to show that connection matters as much as perfection. That making people feel valued is as important as making food that tastes extraordinary. That hospitality, real hospitality, comes from the heart before it comes from the handbook." She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "I know I'm young. I know I don't have decades of experience. But I also know that I earned this opportunity through hard work and integrity. And I intend to prove every day that the faith shown in me was justified." There was a moment of silence, and then Harold nodded. "Well said, Miss Martinez. The board approves moving forward as planned. Opening night is this Friday, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Then we'll see you there." Meeting adjourned. As people filed out, Nathaniel caught Sophie's eye. "We need to talk," he mouthed. She nodded. They met that evening at the Brooklyn location. Stellara was nearly complete now, beautiful in the soft glow of evening light through the tall windows. The dining room was ready, tables set with simple, elegant place settings, the open kitchen gleaming with equipment waiting to be used. This space they had built together, argued over, poured their hearts into. Sophie arrived first, standing in the center of the dining room and trying to process everything that had happened. The validation felt surreal after weeks of doubt. She had been so certain the report would confirm her worst fears. Instead, it had confirmed something else entirely. That she was good at this, that she belonged here, that she had earned it. She heard the door open and turned to see Nathaniel entering, still in his work clothes but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. They stood facing each other across the empty dining room, so much unsaid between them. "Congratulations," Nathaniel said finally. "You did it. You proved them all wrong." "I proved myself wrong," Sophie corrected softly. "That was harder." Nathaniel moved closer, and Sophie let him this time. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry I made you feel like you needed saving, like you weren't strong enough on your own." "I'm sorry I shut you out," Sophie replied. "I was so scared of being seen as weak, of being the girlfriend who got handed everything, that I couldn't let you be there for me." But that's not what partnership means, is it? Partnership means being strong together, not just being strong alone. No, Nathaniel agreed. It means trusting each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. "These 2 weeks without you," Sophie continued, her voice breaking slightly, "I've been miserable. Not just because I missed you, though I did, every single day, but because I realized that proving I could do it alone doesn't mean I want to. I don't want to build a life alone, Nate. I want to build it with you." Nathaniel reached for her hands, pulling her close. "I love you, Sophie Martinez. Not because you work for my company, not because you're brilliant at what you do, though you are, but because you make me want to be better. You remind me why any of this matters. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that caring isn't a liability, that my father was right when he said connection is what makes life worth living." "I love you too," Sophie whispered. "And I'm sorry I made you wait. Sorry I doubted us." "You had to do what you needed to do," Nathaniel said gently. "And now you know. You're here because you earned it. Because you're extraordinary at this work. And I'm just lucky enough to be part of your journey." Sophie felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears this time. Tears of relief and joy and love. When Nathaniel kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding something precious that she had thought lost. "So we're really doing this," she said when they finally broke apart. "Building Stellara together, building a life together." "If you'll have me," Nathaniel replied. "All of me. The parts that are still learning how to be vulnerable. The parts that sometimes get controlling when I'm scared. The parts that need you to remind me what matters. I'll take all of it," Sophie promised. "If you'll take all of me. The parts that doubt myself. The parts that are still figuring out how to accept help. The parts that sometimes push away the people I love because I'm afraid." "Deal," Nathaniel said and kissed her again. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of final preparations. The staff came in for last rehearsals, running through service scenarios until everyone could execute them flawlessly. Toby and his kitchen team did final equipment tests and menu run-throughs. The wine was delivered and carefully stored. The flowers arrived and were arranged. Every detail was checked and rechecked. Sophie led her team with confidence that felt earned now, not questioned. When a server needed encouragement, she provided it. When a problem arose with the reservation system, she solved it. When Toby worried about timing between kitchen and front of house, she worked with him to refine the coordination until it flowed seamlessly. Nathaniel watched her lead and felt pride swell in his chest. This was what he had seen that first night when she tried to protect his money. This core of integrity and competence that no amount of doubt could diminish. She belonged here. She had always belonged here. On Thursday afternoon, Sophie's mother arrived from Austin. Elena Martinez walked into Stellara and burst into tears at the sight of what her daughter had created. "Mama, don't cry," Sophie said, hugging her mother tightly. "We haven't even opened yet." "I'm not crying because I'm sad, mijita." Elena pulled back to look at her daughter, her hands framing Sophie's face. "I'm crying because your father should be here to see this, to see what you've built, to see the woman you've become." "He is here," Sophie said softly. "In every decision I made, every time I asked myself what integrity looked like, that was all him." "Yes," Elena agreed. "It was. And he's so proud. I know he is." That evening, Sophie introduced her mother to Nathaniel properly. Not just the brief meeting in Austin, but a real conversation over dinner. Elena sized him up with the practiced eye of a mother who knew how to spot a man's character beneath the surface polish. "You take care of my daughter," Elena said at one point, direct and unflinching. "Every day for the rest of my life if she'll have me," Nathaniel replied. Just as direct. Elena smiled then, the first real smile since arriving. "Good answer. Your father would have liked her, you know. Roberto. He would have seen past the fancy suits to who you really are." "I wish I could have met him," Nathaniel said. "Sophie talks about him often. The lessons he taught her about integrity and hard work." "Those lessons are in her bones now," Elena said. "You can't take them out even if you tried. And they'll be in your children's bones too when the time comes." Sophie felt her cheeks warm, but Nathaniel just smiled. "I hope so. I really hope so." Friday morning arrived clear and cold, with winter sunshine pouring through the tall windows of Stellara. Opening night was 12 hours away. Sophie walked through the restaurant one final time, checking every detail. The tables gleamed with polish. The glassware sparkled. The open kitchen was immaculate and ready. Her staff would arrive at 4 for final preparations before doors opened at 7. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Then her phone rang at 3 in the afternoon. The caller ID showed Carlos Mendez, her head server. "Carlos, what's up?" "Miss Martinez, I'm so sorry." His voice was strained, weak. "I'm in the emergency room, food poisoning. I ate lunch from this new place and I'm really sick." Sophie's heart sank. "Okay, don't worry about tonight. Just focus on getting better." "There's more." Carlos sounded miserable. "I texted the team to warn them about the restaurant, but 3 other servers ate there too. Melissa, Jake, and Devin. They're all sick. We're all in the same hospital." Sophie felt the world tilt. 4 servers down, her head server, and 3 of her most experienced staff, 6 hours before the most important opening night of her career. "Okay," she said, her mind already racing. "You focus on recovering. I'll handle it." "I'm so sorry, Miss Martinez." "Not your fault, Carlos. Get well." Sophie ended the call and immediately dialed Nathaniel. He answered on the first ring. "We have a situation," she said, and explained about the food poisoning. "Do we postpone?" Nathaniel asked, and Sophie could hear he was leaving it entirely up to her. "Your call." Sophie looked around the perfect restaurant, thought about the critics and VIPs who were scheduled to attend, thought about her team and her mother and everything they had worked for. "No," she said firmly, "we don't postpone, we adapt." "What do you need?" "I need Rosa," Sophie said, "and she needs to bring backup." One phone call to Rosa Delgado was all it took. 20 minutes later, Rosa walked through the doors of Stellara with 3 veteran servers from Celestine, all of them willing to help the young woman they had mentored. "We can't pay you what you deserve on this short notice," Sophie started, but Rosa cut her off. "Mia, I'm not here for money. I'm here for you. Now tell us what you need." The next 2 hours were intense. Sophie ran Rosa and the backup servers through Stellara's service philosophy, the menu, the table sections, the coordination with the kitchen. They were professionals, so they absorbed it quickly, but it still required condensing weeks of training into a crash course. Toby came out of the kitchen at one point and found Sophie demonstrating proper plate presentation. "Your girl's got steel in her spine," he told Nathaniel, who was watching from the bar area. "I know," Nathaniel said quietly. "That's why I love her." At 5:30, Sophie gathered her entire team for a final meeting. The full staff minus the 4 who were sick, plus Rosa and her 3 ringers who had agreed to work the opening. "Tonight is the culmination of months of work," Sophie said, looking at each face in turn. "I know some of you are nervous. I know the circumstances aren't perfect. But let me tell you what I know about every single person in this room. You're here because you understand that hospitality is more than a job. It's about making people feel valued, about creating experiences they'll remember, about connection." She moved to stand in the center of the group, her voice growing stronger. 4 of our team members can't be here tonight because they're sick. That's not ideal. But we have 4 incredible professionals who stepped up to help us. Rosa, Melissa, Anthony, and Keisha, thank you for being here. You represent what this industry should be, people taking care of people. Rosa nodded, pride evident in her expression. "To everyone else," Sophie continued, "tonight you get to show New York City what we've built here, what we believe, that a great meal is about more than just food. It's about feeling welcomed, feeling seen, feeling like you belong." Her voice caught slightly, emotion breaking through. "My father used to say that your character is what you do when you think no one is watching." Tonight, everyone is watching. Critics, board members, the entire industry. And we're going to show them our character. We're going to show them that Stellara isn't just another restaurant. It's a home where everyone is family. The staff erupted in applause. Toby stepped forward and raised his hand. "Chef wants to say something," he announced with a grin. "Tonight we cook with our hearts as much as our hands. Sophie taught us that. Let's make her proud." "You already have," Sophie said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Now let's open these doors and change some lives." At 7 o'clock exactly, the doors of Stellara opened for the first time. Guests began to arrive, bundled against the November cold and curious about the newest addition to Brooklyn's dining scene. Sophie stationed herself near the entrance, greeting each person personally, making eye contact, learning names when possible. The food critic from the New York Times arrived at 7:30, anonymous as they always were, but Sophie's trained eye spotted her immediately. She ensured the critic's experience was perfect without being intrusive, letting the food and service speak for themselves. By 8 o'clock, the restaurant was full. The open kitchen hummed with controlled energy, Toby and his team executing every dish with precision and artistry. The servers moved through the dining room with grace and warmth, Rosa and her team blending seamlessly with the regular staff. The atmosphere was exactly what Sophie had envisioned, elegant but comfortable, impressive but welcoming. Sophie moved between the kitchen and the dining room, troubleshooting small issues before they became problems, supporting her staff, checking on guests. Nathaniel watched from his position at the bar, staying out of the way but ready to help if needed. This was Sophie's night, her vision come to life. At one communal table, Sophie noticed something magical happening. A group of strangers who'd been seated together were now sharing dishes, laughing, exchanging phone numbers. They had come as individuals and were leaving as friends. That was the dream. That was the whole point. The food critic approached Sophie near the end of the evening, breaking protocol to speak directly. "Off the record," she said quietly, "this is special. What you've created here. It has soul. That's rare." "Thank you," Sophie managed, her throat tight with emotion. Elena found Sophie around 9:30, tears streaming down her face. "Your father would be so proud," she said. "Not just of the restaurant, of you, of the woman you've become." Sophie hugged her mother tightly, both of them crying now. "I kept my promise, Mama." I reached higher. "You did more than that, mijita. You soared." At 10:30, with service winding down but the dining room still full of happy guests lingering over coffee and dessert, Nathaniel stood up from the bar and moved to the center of the restaurant. He picked up a wine glass and tapped it gently with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "May I have your attention, please?" he said, his voice carrying through the space. "For those who don't know me, I'm Nathaniel Sterling. I own this restaurant and several others in the Sterling Group." The room quieted, curious faces turning toward him. "Tonight was perfect," Nathaniel continued. "This restaurant is everything we dreamed it could be. Exceptional food, beautiful space, genuine hospitality. But it wouldn't exist without one person's vision, leadership, and heart." He gestured to Sophie, who suddenly realized where this was going and felt her pulse skyrocket. "Most of you know that Sophie and I are together," Nathaniel said, his eyes locked on hers. "What you don't know is that 3 months ago, in private, I asked her to marry me and she said yes, but I never gave her the proposal she deserved. The kind of proposal that celebrates not just our love, but the community we've built, the family we've created, the journey that brought us here." Sophie felt tears streaming down her face as Nathaniel crossed the dining room to stand in front of her. He got down on one knee right there in the center of Stellara, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Sophie Martinez, you walked into my life when I needed you most. You showed me that control isn't strength, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that my father was right when he said connection is what makes life worth living. You make me braver, kinder, more human. You've taught me that love isn't a liability. It's the only thing that really matters." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me? Here, in front of everyone who helped us build this dream. Will you be my partner in everything, my wife, my best friend, my home?" Sophie was full on sobbing now, but she managed to nod. "Yes," she said. "I already said yes, but yes again. 1,000 times yes." Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. When he kissed her, the entire restaurant erupted. Applause, cheers, happy tears from guests and staff alike. Rosa was crying openly. Elena was clutching Jade's arm, both of them beaming. Toby emerged from the kitchen with his entire team to clap and whistle. It was perfect, messy in public and absolutely perfect. The celebration continued for another hour. Champagne appeared from somewhere. Guests who had been strangers hours before now toasted Sophie and Nathaniel's engagement. The staff danced between tables. Music played. Joy filled every corner of Stellara until the walls themselves seemed to glow with it. Late that night, after the last guest had left and the staff had gone home, Sophie and Nathaniel sat alone at table 7. This table had been moved from Celestine specifically for this purpose, the table where their story had begun, where Sophie had tried to protect a sleeping stranger and gotten fired for her trouble. "Do you remember the first time we sat at this table?" Nathaniel asked, holding Sophie's hand across the white linen. "I thought my life was over," Sophie admitted. "Turned out it was just beginning." "I was testing you," Nathaniel said, "trying to prove that people couldn't be trusted, that caring made you vulnerable. And I proved you wrong." "No." Nathaniel lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You proved me right. Caring does make you vulnerable. But that's not a weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. Opening our hearts knowing they might break. That's courage." Sophie leaned across the table and kissed him softly. "So what's next for us?" "More restaurants," Nathaniel said. "More adventures. A life built on honesty and partnership. And maybe, someday, tiny humans who inherit your integrity and my terrible sense of humor." Sophie laughed through fresh tears. "That sounds perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, looking at the restaurant around them. Their creation. Their dream made real. Tomorrow would bring reviews and reality, and the hard work of maintaining what they had built. But tonight was for celebration, for joy, for acknowledging how far they had come. Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from her mother, who was back at the hotel. "Your father is smiling down on you tonight, mijita. I feel it in my bones. You kept your promise. You reached higher than any of us imagined. But more importantly, you stayed true to yourself. That's the real success. I love you. Sleep well." Sophie showed the message to Nathaniel, who read it and smiled. "She's right, about staying true to yourself. That's what makes you extraordinary, Sophie. Not the restaurant, not the success, just you being exactly who you are." "Who I am is someone who loves you," Sophie said simply. "Everything else is just details." "Best detail ever," Nathaniel replied and kissed her again. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds sat in the restaurant they had built together and dreamed about the future. A future that looked bright and uncertain and absolutely worth fighting for. Because in the end, that's what love was. Not the absence of fear or doubt or difficulty, but the willingness to face all of it together, to be vulnerable and brave and hopeful even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Sophie looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had given it to her, then at the space they had created together. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because someone had given her this opportunity, but because she had earned it. Not because love had been easy, but because it had been worth every moment of struggle. The first chapter of their story had ended that night at table 7, when she was fired for trying to help. But that ending had led to this beginning. And this beginning, Sophie thought, as Nathaniel stood and pulled her into his arms for one more dance in their empty restaurant, this was just the start of something beautiful. 6 months after opening night, Sophie stood in the dining room of Stellara at 10 in the morning, sunlight streaming through the tall windows and illuminating the space with golden warmth. The restaurant was closed for the lunch service, giving her a rare moment of quiet in what had become a whirlwind of success beyond anything they had imagined. The New York Times Review had published 3 days after opening, 4 stars and a write-up that called Stellara a revelation, a restaurant that reminded critics why they fell in love with dining in the first place. The writer had praised the food, certainly, but had focused more on the atmosphere, the service, the indefinable quality that made guests feel not just welcomed, but genuinely valued. Since then, Stellara had been fully booked every night, with a waiting list that stretched weeks into the future. Food bloggers wrote glowing posts, Instagram filled with photos of the exposed brick and warm lighting, of dishes artfully plated, of groups of friends laughing around communal tables. But more than the aesthetic success, what made Sophie's heart full was the stories guests shared, about anniversaries celebrated, about first dates that turned into engagements, about strangers who became friends over shared meals. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nathaniel. "Board meeting just ended. Big news, coming to you now." Sophie smiled, still getting used to the ring on her finger, the way her heart lifted every time she heard from him. They had moved into Nathaniel's penthouse together 3 months ago, slowly combining their lives and their belongings, learning the rhythms of shared space and shared futures. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes later, his expression caught somewhere between excitement and something that might have been nervousness. He pulled Sophie into his arms first, kissing her thoroughly before pulling back with a grin. "The board approved it," he said, "all of it." Sophie had known this meeting was coming, had helped prepare the proposal, but hearing it was real made her breath catch. All of it? 5 restaurants? 5 Stellara-style restaurants over the next 2 years, Nathaniel confirmed. Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, and Austin. Each one adapting the model to its local community while maintaining the core philosophy. And they want you to oversee the development of all of them. "Me," Sophie repeated, still processing. "Oversee all 5? Not day-to-day operations, that's not scalable. But developing the service philosophy for each location, training the management teams, ensuring each restaurant captures what makes Stellara special. Director of Guest Experience for the entire Sterling Restaurant Group. 75 locations, Sophie. You'd be shaping how every single one approaches hospitality." The magnitude of it settled over Sophie like a weight and a gift simultaneously. "That's enormous." "You're ready for it," Nathaniel said with absolute certainty. "You proved that 6 months ago. Now you get to prove it again on a bigger scale." Sophie moved to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn street that had become so familiar. A year ago, she had been sleeping on an air mattress in Queens with $47 in her wallet. Now she was being offered the chance to influence how 75 restaurants treated their guests, to spread a philosophy of genuine connection across an entire company. "What if I can't do it?" she asked quietly. "What if I was only successful here because it was small and personal?" Nathaniel came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "Then you'll figure it out. You'll adapt and learn and grow, just like you always do." "But I don't think you'll fail, Sophie. I think you're going to change the entire industry's understanding of what hospitality means." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his certainty. "Okay, yes, let's do it." The wedding planning began in earnest that week. They had decided on an October wedding, giving them 5 months to prepare while managing the expansion of the Stellara concept. Elena flew up from Austin to help, staying in the guest room of the penthouse and filling the space with a mother's loving interference and endless opinions about flowers and invitations. Sophie tried on dresses in a boutique in Manhattan, Elena sitting beside her with tears already forming before Sophie even emerged from the dressing room. When Sophie stepped out in the third dress, a simple, elegant gown with lace sleeves and a flowing skirt, Elena covered her mouth with both hands. "That's the one," she whispered. "Oh, mijita, that's the one." Sophie looked at herself in the mirror and saw not just a woman in a wedding dress, but everything that had led to this moment. The scared girl who had reached for a money clip, the determined young professional who had refused to doubt herself, the woman who had learned that vulnerability was strength and love was worth the risk. "Papa would have loved this," Sophie said softly. "He does love it," Elena corrected gently. "I feel him here with us. He's so proud, baby girl." They planned the wedding for Stellara itself. The restaurant would close for the evening, transforming into a celebration space for 80 guests. Close friends, family, staff, the people who had supported them through everything. Rosa would be Sophie's maid of honor. Toby would stand as Nathaniel's best man. It would be intimate and meaningful and entirely them. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sophie and Nathaniel took a trip to Connecticut. They drove in comfortable silence, hands linked across the center console, until they reached the cemetery where William Sterling was buried. It was a beautiful space, old trees providing shade over carefully maintained grounds. They walked to William's headstone, and Nathaniel knelt to place fresh flowers at its base. Sophie stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, giving him the space to say what he needed to say. "Dad," Nathaniel began, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to meet Sophie properly. You'd love her. She's everything you told me to look for in a partner. Someone who sees people first, someone who makes me better, someone who reminds me why any of this matters." He paused, gathering himself. "I'm marrying her in 3 weeks, at a restaurant we built together, a restaurant that's more like what you originally dreamed than anything I've created on my own. She helped me remember your vision, helped me understand that connection is what makes food worth serving." Sophie knelt beside Nathaniel, adding her own flowers to the arrangement. "Mr. Sterling, I promise to take care of your son, to honor what you built, to make sure the legacy you started continues in a way that would make you proud. And I promise that our children, when we have them, will know their grandfather through stories, will understand that he built an empire on caring about people." They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in thought, before Nathaniel stood and helped Sophie to her feet. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for understanding how much this matters." "Of course," Sophie replied simply. "He's family, and family matters." The following weekend was Sophie's turn. They flew to Austin, and Sophie led Nathaniel to the small cemetery where Roberto Martinez was buried. Her father's grave was simpler than William's, marked with a modest stone that read, "Beloved husband and father." Someone had left fresh flowers recently, probably Elena. Sophie knelt and touched the stone, her fingers tracing the letters of her father's name. "Papa, I kept my promise. I reached higher. I built something that matters. And I found someone who sees me the way you saw Mama. Someone who loves me for who I am, not what I can give him." She felt tears streaming down her face but didn't wipe them away. "You would have liked Nate. He works with his hands the way you did, just in kitchens instead of auto shops. He believes in doing things right even when it's hard. He taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that caring about people is the whole point." Nathaniel knelt beside her, adding his own flowers. "Sir, I know I can't ask your permission because you're not here to give it. But I want you to know that I see your daughter's value. I see her strength and integrity and the way she makes everyone around her better. I promise to spend every day being worthy of her love, to build a life that would make you proud, to teach our children the lessons about character that you taught Sophie." They stayed until the sun began to set, talking about memories and dreams and the ways the dead lived on in those who loved them. When they finally left, Sophie felt lighter somehow, like her father's blessing, whatever form it took, had been given. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of final details: dress fittings and tuxedo adjustments, menu tastings and seating charts, a rehearsal dinner at a small Italian place that reminded Sophie of their first date. And through it all, the building excitement of knowing that in just days, she would marry the man who had started as a cold stranger and become her entire heart. The night before the wedding, Sophie stayed at Jade's new apartment, following the tradition of not seeing the groom before the ceremony. Jade and Rosa kept her company, the three of them drinking wine and sharing stories late into the night. "I can't believe you're getting married tomorrow," Jade said, refilling their glasses. "A year ago, you were sleeping on my air mattress wondering how you'd pay rent." "A year ago, I thought getting fired was the end of everything," Sophie admitted. "Turns out it was just the beginning." "That's life, isn't it?" Rosa said with a smile. "The things we think will destroy us sometimes turn out to be exactly what we needed." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, October sunshine pouring through windows and painting everything gold. Sophie woke in Jade's guest room and lay there for a moment, savoring the knowledge that today she would marry Nathaniel Sterling. Today they would stand in front of everyone who mattered and promise forever. Elena arrived at 9 to help Sophie get ready, bringing champagne and a mother's steady hands to help with hair and makeup. Jade worked on Sophie's hair, while Rosa helped with the dress, and Sophie let herself be tended to by the women who had carried her through the hardest year of her life. When she was finally ready, standing in front of the mirror in her wedding dress, with her hair swept up and her mother's pearls around her neck, Elena handed her a small box. "Something borrowed," she said, opening it to reveal a delicate lace mantilla. "This was your grandmother's. She wore it when she married your grandfather in Mexico. Your father and I used it at our wedding. I've been saving it for you." Sophie's hands trembled as she accepted the veil, the weight of generations settling over her shoulders like a blessing. "Mama, it's beautiful." "You're beautiful," Elena corrected, her eyes shining with tears. "Your father would be so happy right now, so proud of the woman you've become." They arrived at Stellara at 3, giving them time before the 4 o'clock ceremony. The restaurant had been transformed with flowers and candles, the harsh beauty of exposed bricks softened by ivory roses and golden light. White chairs were arranged in rows facing a simple altar near the windows. It was intimate and elegant and perfectly them. Nathaniel was already there, waiting in the small office with Toby and 2 other groomsmen. Sophie caught a glimpse of him through the doorway, handsome in his tuxedo, and felt her heart race with anticipation. Just a few more hours and they would be married. At 4 o'clock exactly, the guests were seated and the music began. Sophie's hands shook slightly as she took her mother's arm. Elena would walk her down the aisle since Roberto couldn't. It was both sad and right, honoring the parent who had remained while acknowledging the one who was gone. "Ready, mijita," Elena whispered. "Ready," Sophie confirmed. They walked through the doorway, and Sophie saw Nathaniel at the altar. His expression when he saw her, the way his composure cracked and tears filled his eyes, made her own tears start. This man who had been so controlled, so guarded, was crying openly at the sight of her. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Elena walked Sophie down the short aisle and placed her daughter's hand in Nathaniel's, squeezing both of their hands once before stepping back. The officiant was an older man who had been a friend of William Sterling's, someone who had known both families and understood what this union meant. "We are gathered here today," he began, "to celebrate the marriage of Sophie and Nathaniel, 2 people who found each other in unexpected circumstances and built something beautiful together." The ceremony was simple and traditional until the vows. They had written their own, working on them separately, and Sophie went first with her heart in her throat. "Nathaniel, the first night I met you, I tried to protect you from thieves who didn't exist. I didn't know then that I would spend my life trying to protect your heart, not from the world, but for the world. Because your heart, once you let someone close enough to see it, is the most beautiful thing I've ever known." Her voice shook, but she continued. "You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help doesn't make you less, that love is the bravest thing we can do. You make me want to be better, kinder, stronger, not because I'm not enough as I am, but because you inspire me to grow. I promise to choose you every day, to challenge you when you need it and support you always, to build a life and legacy that honors both our fathers, to never let fear make me small or doubt make me cruel, to love you in the easy moments and the hard ones, to be your partner in everything." Nathaniel was openly crying now, and Sophie wasn't far behind. "Sophie," Nathaniel began, his voice rough with emotion, "you walked into my restaurant and my life when I needed you most, even though I didn't know it. I had built walls so high I couldn't see over them anymore. I had convinced myself that control was the same as strength, that distance was the same as safety. And then you tried to protect me and I fired you for it." A soft laugh rippled through the guests. "But you came back," Nathaniel continued. "You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. You showed me that my father was right all along. That connection is what makes life worth living. That caring about people isn't a liability, it's the whole point. You make me more human, more real, more myself than I've ever been. I promise to be your partner in everything, to support your dreams even when they scare me, to let you be strong without making you feel like you have to be strong alone, to build a life where our children learn that integrity matters more than success, though success built on integrity is sweetest of all." He reached up and wiped away Sophie's tears gently. "I promise to spend every day being worthy of the gift you've given me, the gift of your trust, your love, your belief that I could be better. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for seeing who I could become. The officiant waited until they had both composed themselves before continuing. By the power vested in me, and with great joy, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathaniel, you may kiss your bride. When Nathaniel kissed Sophie, soft and sweet and full of promise, the restaurant erupted in applause and cheers. They broke apart laughing, foreheads pressed together, and Sophie felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. Ladies and gentlemen, the officiant announced with a smile, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. The reception was everything a wedding should be: good food and better company, laughter and dancing, and toasts that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure. Elena spoke about watching her daughter grow from a girl in an auto shop to a woman building an empire. Toby spoke about watching his best friend learn to be vulnerable and how beautiful that transformation had been. Rosa spoke about the first day Sophie walked into Celestine, terrified but determined, and how proud she was to see where that courage had led. When it was time for the first dance, Nathaniel pulled Sophie close and they swayed to an old song that both of them loved, from a movie they had watched together on one of those early dates. He sang softly in her ear, off-key and perfect, and Sophie laughed with pure joy. Mr. Sterling, she whispered, I like the sound of that. Mrs. Sterling, he replied, I love the sound of that. Late into the night, after most guests had gone home and only the closest friends and family remained, Sophie found herself back at table 7, the same table where Nathaniel had conducted his test, the same table where they had sat together just 6 months ago and talked about building a life together. Nathaniel joined her, loosening his bow tie and rolling up his sleeves. Tired? Happily exhausted, Sophie confirmed. It was perfect, wasn't it? It was. Nathaniel took her hand, turning her wedding ring to catch the light. We did good, Sophie Sterling. We really did. 1 year after opening Stellara, Sophie stood on a stage at the New York Hospitality Awards, accepting the Industry Innovator of the Year award. The recognition came from a panel of restaurant critics, culinary school deans, and industry veterans who cited her work not just at Stellara, but in transforming the service culture across all Sterling Restaurant Group properties. I used to think success meant climbing higher, Sophie said into the microphone, her voice carrying through the ballroom. But real success is lifting others up with you. It's creating spaces where people feel valued, where staff know their work matters, where guests leave feeling better than when they arrived. She looked out at the audience and found Nathaniel in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. I'm grateful to everyone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. To my mother, who taught me that dreams were worth chasing. To my father, who taught me that integrity matters more than anything. To my husband, who taught me that vulnerability is strength. And to every single person who works in this industry with their heart as much as their hands. You're the real innovators. I'm just trying to keep up. The applause was thunderous, and when Sophie returned to her seat, Nathaniel pulled her close and kissed her temple. Your father would be so proud, he whispered. Both our fathers, Sophie corrected. This is their legacy as much as ours. 2 weeks later, they stood together in front of a crowd of scholarship recipients and their families. The Roberto Martinez and William Sterling Foundation had been Nathaniel and Sophie's idea, created with a $5 million initial endowment. The foundation provided full scholarships to hospitality students from working-class backgrounds, students who had the passion and potential, but not the resources to pursue formal training. This year's class of 20 scholars sat in the front row. Young men and women from across the country who had been selected not just for grades, but for demonstrated commitment to service and community. Sophie looked at their faces and saw herself a few years ago, hungry for opportunity, determined to prove themselves, uncertain if they really belonged. Roberto Martinez was a mechanic, Sophie told the audience. William Sterling started with one small restaurant. Neither of them had advantages or connections. What they had was integrity, work ethic, a belief that how you treat people matters more than what you achieve. She held up the folder containing the scholarship details. This foundation exists because we believe potential isn't limited by circumstance, because we know that the next great innovator in hospitality might be working 2 jobs to pay for community college right now, because talent is universal, but opportunity isn't. Nathaniel stepped forward to stand beside his wife. My father told me once that the true measure of success is what you build that outlasts you. These scholarships, he gestured to the recipients, are our way of building something that will outlast us, of making sure that 20 years from now, someone else's daughter or son gets the chance Sophie got, the chance to prove that they belong. After the ceremony, Sophie spoke with each recipient individually. She learned their stories, their dreams, their fears. A young woman from rural Montana who wanted to open a restaurant serving her grandmother's recipes. A first-generation immigrant from Ethiopia who dreamed of bringing his culture's flavors to fine dining. A former foster kid from Philadelphia who had found purpose working in a community kitchen. You belong here, Sophie told each one. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. 3 months after the scholarship ceremony, Sophie woke feeling different, a subtle shift she couldn't quite name. She went about her morning routine, but the feeling persisted, and by noon she had gone to the pharmacy and returned home with a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. Sophie sat on the bathroom floor and cried. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears, terrified tears, all mixed together. She was pregnant. She and Nathaniel were going to have a baby. Their father's legacy would continue into another generation. When Nathaniel came home that evening, Sophie had set up a small surprise. She placed the positive pregnancy test in a box with a note that read, "Our next collaboration, coming in 7 months." He opened it in the living room, and Sophie watched his face cycle through confusion, comprehension, shock, and pure joy in the space of seconds. "You're pregnant?" "We're pregnant," Sophie corrected. And then she was in his arms, and they were both crying and laughing and holding each other like they would never let go. "I'm going to be a dad," Nathaniel said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sophie asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Nathaniel replied. "Terrified, thrilled, grateful, overwhelmed, all of it, but mostly happy. So incredibly happy." They called Elena first, who screamed with joy so loudly that Sophie had to hold the phone away from her ear. "A baby! Oh, mijita, a baby!" Roberta would be over the moon. Next they called Toby and Rosa and Jade, sharing the news with the people who had become their chosen family. Each call brought more celebration, more tears, more joy. That night, lying in bed with Nathaniel's hand on her still flat stomach, Sophie felt peace settle over her like a blanket. They had built so much together, a restaurant that had become 5 restaurants, a philosophy that had transformed an entire company, a love that had survived doubt and distance and every obstacle thrown in its path. And now they would build a family. "What should we name her?" Nathaniel asked. "If it's a girl." "Roberta," Sophie said immediately. "After my father, Roberto." "Roberta Elena Sterling," Nathaniel agreed. "And if it's a boy?" "William Roberto," Sophie replied. "Both our fathers, both our legacies." "Perfect," Nathaniel said, and kissed her softly. "Absolutely perfect." 6 months into the pregnancy, visibly showing now and glowing with the changes in her body, Sophie asked Nathaniel to take her somewhere. They drove to Manhattan and pulled up in front of Celestine, the restaurant where it had all begun. "I want to see table 7, Sophie said. "The original one, where you tested me." They went inside, and the current manager recognized them immediately and offered a personal tour. But Sophie only wanted to see one thing. They walked through the dining room until they reached the corner where table 7 sat, still in its original position. There was a small plaque on the wall now, something the restaurant had added after Stellara's success. It read, "Table 7, where integrity met opportunity, where the Sterling legacy began, November 2025. Sophie sat in the chair where she had confronted Nathaniel, and he sat where he had pretended to sleep. They looked at each other across the white linen, and so much passed between them without words. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't reached for that money?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "No," Sophie said firmly, "because I couldn't not reach for it. It wasn't a choice, really. It was just who I am, who my father raised me to be." "And I'm grateful for that," Nathaniel said. "For who you are, for the choice you made, for everything that came after." They sat in silence for a while, 2 people who had started as strangers at this table and become everything to each other. Then Sophie stood and held out her hand to Nathaniel. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home. Let's go to Stellara." They drove to Brooklyn, to the restaurant that was theirs, and walked through the space in the quiet hours before service began. The exposed brick glowed in afternoon light. The open kitchen gleamed. The tables waited for the evening guests who would fill them with laughter and conversation and connection. "This is what we built," Sophie said, one hand on her pregnant belly. "Not just a restaurant, a place where people matter, where integrity comes first, where my father's lessons about character meet your father's lessons about connection. And now we get to teach our child those same lessons," Nathaniel added, his hand covering hers on her stomach, "about working hard and caring deeply and building something that matters." Sophie turned to face him fully. "Do you ever think about that first night? About how angry you were when you caught me?" "All the time," Nathaniel admitted. "And every time I'm grateful I was smart enough to give you a second chance. Smart enough to see past my own rules to what really mattered." "I was so scared that night," Sophie confessed. "Scared I'd made a terrible mistake. Scared I didn't belong in New York. Scared I'd never make something of myself." "And now?" Nathaniel asked softly. "Now I know that belonging isn't about geography or money or education. It's about staying true to who you are no matter where you are. It's about bringing your integrity with you wherever you go." "That's what you taught me," Nathaniel said. "That real strength isn't control, it's authenticity. It's caring, even when it costs you. It's being vulnerable enough to let people in." Sophie felt tears welling up, hormones making her extra emotional. "We've come so far, Nate. Sometimes I can't believe this is real." "It's real," he assured her. "All of it, the restaurants, the foundation, the baby, the life we're building. And it all started because you were brave enough to do the right thing even when it got you fired." They stood together in the quiet restaurant, surrounded by the evidence of what integrity and hard work and love could build. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, a husband and wife held each other and their unborn child and dreamed about the future. "People ask me what made me reach for that money clip that first night," Sophie said softly. "The truth is, I don't know if I can explain it. It was instinct. It was how I was raised. It was just who I am." She looked up at Nathaniel. "But I know what that choice led to. It led to this. To us. To a life built on honesty and partnership and the belief that people matter more than protocol." "My father used to say that character is what you do when you think no one is watching," Sophie continued. "I thought no one was watching that night. But someone was. And that someone saw something in me that I didn't see in myself yet." "I saw someone brave," Nathaniel said. "Someone principled. Someone who cared more about doing right than doing what was safe. And I've spent every day since grateful that I was smart enough to not let you walk away." The evening service would start in a few hours. Staff would arrive to prepare. Guests would fill the tables. Another night of connection and community would unfold. But for now, in this quiet moment, it was just the two of them and the baby they would soon meet, and the legacy they had built together. 6 weeks later, Sophie gave birth to a healthy baby girl, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's nose. They named her Roberta Elena Sterling, and when the nurse placed her in Sophie's arms for the first time, Sophie looked down at her daughter and saw the future. Elena arrived from Austin the next day and cried when she held her granddaughter. "She looks like Roberto," she whispered. "Around the eyes. Oh, Sophie, he would be so happy right now." "He is happy, Mama," Sophie said with certainty. "I know he is." Nathaniel held his daughter with trembling hands and tears streaming down his face. This man who had once been too controlled to show emotion, now completely undone by love. "She's perfect," he said wonderingly. "Sophie, she's absolutely perfect." Over the next weeks, as they adjusted to life with a newborn, Sophie found herself thinking often about her father, about the lessons he had taught her in that auto shop in Texas, about integrity and hard work and the importance of character. And she knew that those lessons would continue, passing from Roberto to Sophie to Roberta, a legacy more valuable than any restaurant or company or award. One evening, when Roberta was 2 months old and finally sleeping for longer stretches, Sophie and Nathaniel sat together on the couch with their daughter between them. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows. Music played softly in the background. Everything was quiet and perfect and exactly right. "What do you think she'll do with her life?" Nathaniel mused, gently touching Roberta's tiny hand. "Whatever she wants," Sophie said firmly. "Whatever makes her feel like she's honoring her grandfather's memories. Whatever helps her bring more light into the world. She'll be extraordinary, Nathaniel said with certainty. How could she not be with you as her mother? With us as her parents, Sophie corrected. We're in this together. Always, Nathaniel agreed. In everything, always together. And sitting there with her husband and her daughter, and the life they had built from one brave choice, Sophie knew that her father's lessons had been right all along. Your character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Your integrity is the foundation everything else is built on. And love, real love, is the bravest thing you can do. She had reached for that money clip because it was the right thing to do. She had walked away from Celestine with her dignity intact, because that mattered more than the job. She had fought for what she believed in even when it was hard, because her father had taught her that easy paths rarely led anywhere worth going. And those choices, those moments of integrity when everything was uncertain, had led to this. To a husband who loved her completely, to a daughter who would learn the same lessons, to restaurants that treated people with dignity, to a foundation that gave others the chances she had fought so hard for, to a legacy that would outlast them all. Sophie looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware of the love surrounding her, and whispered a promise. I'll teach you what your grandfathers taught me, little one. That integrity matters more than success, that how you treat people is more important than what you achieve, that one brave choice can change everything. And someday, when Roberta was old enough to understand, they would take her to table 7 at Celestine. They would tell her the story of how her parents met, about a test of character and a firing and a second chance, about building something beautiful from an uncertain beginning, about love that survived every obstacle because it was built on honesty and respect and shared values. They would teach her that belonging isn't something given, but something earned through character and integrity, that success means nothing if you compromise yourself to achieve it, that the bravest thing you can do is stay true to who you are, even when the whole world is watching. Your character, Sophie thought, gently touching her daughter's soft hair, is what you do when you think no one is watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone is watching, and that someone sees not just your actions but your heart. And everything changes. Outside, Manhattan glowed with possibility. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had built something worth building. Not just restaurants or companies or awards, but a life of integrity, a legacy of caring, a future where character mattered more than anything else. And it had all started with one brave choice, one moment of doing right even when it cost everything, one young woman reaching for a money clip to protect a stranger who would become her everything. That was the story they would tell. That was the legacy they would leave. That was the truth that would outlast them all. Integrity, in the end, wasn't just about doing right. It was about being right, being true to yourself, being authentic even when it was hard, being brave enough to care even when it made you vulnerable. And that lesson, passed from Roberto Martinez to Sophie Martinez to Roberta Sterling, would echo through generations, a legacy not of money or success, but of character, the only legacy that truly mattered, the only legacy that could never be taken away.